Today on the Crisscross Cinema Podcast, two fathers from two separate movies cross time and space for their children on the Crisscross Cinema Podcast.
Two fellows meet accidentally, like you and me. No connection between them at all, never saw each other before. They swap murders. Crisscross.
Wilson! I'm sorry, Wilson! A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day.
You gotta keep breathing, because tomorrow the sun will rise. Who knows what the tide could bring?
Hello and welcome to the Crisscross Cinema Podcast, where we crisscross cinema history to find connections that elude the casual eye. Try and spot them along with us. Today's special Father's Day picks cross more than just genre. They cross time and space to reunite with their children in 2000's Frequency and 2014's Interstellar. Hi, I'm Aaron Wilson, a son training to be a father.
And I'm Mark Klobus, a dad who crosses time and space every time he's running behind to pick up his son from somewhere.
And I'm Joseph Wilson, a rocket scientist who often sends things very far through time and space. And I'm also a relatively recent father. Baby boy, just turned 16 months yesterday.
Congratulations.
Thanks so much, absolutely. And another connection with these movies is my wife is a nurse practitioner, just like in Frequency.
Julia.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Lots of things. We're going to come at this from many nerdy directions.
Indeed.
A filmmaker, historian, history teacher, and rocket scientist.
Indeed. I like all the sciences.
Yes.
Rocket science is what I do.
Okay, if you'd like to get access to bonus features and deleted clips from Crisscross and our sister show Facets of Story, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/transcendentertainment. That's TRANSCEND Entertainment. Today, just as always, we'll review our two films, and then we go crisscross to compare and contrast. But first, Mark, what media has flown into your view?
Well, recently I went and I saw Furiosa in the theaters.
Oh, nice.
And to me, it is a sad statement about the movie going public that the film is not doing better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Mad Max Fury Road was huge, and rightfully so. Furiosa is at least as good, if not arguably better, and yet it's not getting anywhere near the same, levels of attention. I mean, and speaking of thematic episodes, if you're ever looking for a great Mother's Day movie watch, but a very hard-edged one, I highly recommend Furiosa.
Furiosa.
Yeah. And apart from that, I also got caught up on the most recent season of The Rookie, which is a show that in so many ways I love it so much because of Nathan Fillion. I mean, he
for sure.
And I think the actors overall are very good. But I've noticed over the course of the series, it's becoming a superhero show. Because they've gone from this great little police procedural to now where they have supervillains. And the supervillains are always fixating on the same small collection of about 4 or 5 officers, most of whom are just uniformed cops. But for some reason, they've got vendettas, and they have to have
It's a very small universe with big.
It's a small universe, and they all have to have like evil plans that they all have to monologue about. It's like, okay, what happened to the cop show? But at the same time, I mean, it's a testament to Nathan Fillion, the casting, and the writing is amusing. So I mean, that kind of carries me through. But every season, I'm like, I feel like I want to just skip over the supervillain plots and get to the procedural stuff that brought me to the show in the first place. How about you? What have you been watching?
Well, lots of things. So generally speaking, I have 5 time slots that can't all be filled with the same thing. So there is lunch time, where me and my wife watch a thing, which is a 30-minute episode of something. So it started when my wife was pregnant. She wasn't able to eat anything unless she had a distraction. So we started watching movies and TV shows, etc., while eating. So there's the lunchtime slot, which is something that's 30 minutes long. It used to be Clone Wars, but recently it shifted to Big Bang Theory, because my wife really likes it's a nerd like you. Yes, it is. Very nerdy. And there is the dinner time slot, which is where we watch a 45-minute to hour-long TV show. And recently that has been Doctor Who.
Oh,
The most recent season?
No, we're catching up to that. I had never seen it before until relatively recently.
Oh, really?
I still haven't seen the original series, where it was the first 9 Doctors? I forget.
7. They did 7
the first
before
7
they were
Doctors.
taken off here.
Haven't seen that. We'll see if I ever do. But we picked up with the remake of it. And
Eccleston?
Eccleston, yeah, I believe so.
Eccleston, Tennant,
Yes,
Smith,
Eccleston, Smith.
Capaldi. Oh gosh, I can't remember the woman's name. This is terrible. So I've only really seen it through Capaldi. So
I see. Yeah. I'm on. Capaldi is the older gentleman.
he's the older one who was playing it more recently. The curly hair, gray.
Yes. We just got to him,
Ah,
and he is way different than the previous ones. There's a real big shift of his personality, where everybody else tends to be a little bit more happy-go-lucky. Humans are awesome, and he's so pessimistic. He's a curmudgeon. So
I feel like that's the secret sauce that's kept it going
Yeah,
for so long.
for
Because
sure,
They can
for
sit
sure.
because it's you're not seeing the same character. And so it changes the whole dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can cycle the companions in and out, but it's really the fact that you can go from the kind of the dandy to the goofball to
that probably makes it a lot easier simultaneously and harder for the main actor, because they can make their own character, but at the same time they're like it puts a big burden on that choice of, did I make the right choice of what this character is like.
yeah, for sure. This more recent curmudgeonly character is almost the opposite of the past characters.
Yeah.
And
Well, the other interesting thing is you're starting to see, and this is really with the new iteration, although you started seeing it a bit with one of the last of the older Doctors, the Doctors who grew up on the show and who are passionate fans. But Capaldi is a huge Doctor Who fan, and so he really, I think, informed his take on the character using that.
one of the things I really liked about Capaldi is the fact that he was a character in the show previous.
Yes.
It's like, oh, it's that guy, the guy that almost died in Pompeii.
Yeah. and it's how supposedly that actually that's written into is that somehow that shaped the regeneration.
The Doctor chose that face.
Yes.
That's cool.
Your favorite character dies, and then he's back, but he's different.
Yes. Aaron, how about you?
Yeah, so I've been watching Modern Family. My brother, Josh, our third of the Trinity.
If it wasn't mentioned, I'm actually Aaron's
Oh,
youngest
yeah,
brother.
I was going to mention that. Yeah, we don't just strangely have the same last name.
Yes, indeed. It is a common last name.
Yes. Anyway, so, yeah, Modern Family. I thought that show was more edgy going in than it actually is. And it's actually more grounded and I don't know, I really like it. And there's a lot of humor in there that especially with comedy writing, when they really land it, I sometimes get really jealous of like, how did they do that? Because I've started writing a comedy recently. Anyway, but I really, that's the biggest thing with TV comedy. I'm like, how do they write so much and so quick with the comedy writing? And
Well, the word I hear used most often is rooms.
Yeah, it's definitely. Yeah, they've got rooms of people. And then Fringe season 3. And for anybody who's watched Fringe, they know that's where things really get good. And I'm not going to spoil why that is, but
Firing on all cylinders.
yeah, firing on all cylinders. It's Fringe. Like it's really good. It's one of those that you just have to watch to see how good it is. And I've got a friend, Sarah, who's going to be on the podcast somewhere down the line. I recommended it to her, and she started binging it, and she's like, "This is so good." And anyway, just go watch it. It's like X-Files mixed with police procedural and a little bit of Lost, but it doesn't have the mystery boxes that just go forever and don't go anywhere.
And the characters are so good. I mean, Anna Torv is just so amazing. Like when she's channeling Leonard Nimoy,
Oh yeah, I just got to that episode.
Yeah.
I'm on that one right now.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just amazing to see someone who is that good of an actor, and who is. I mean, she's done good stuff since then. She was in Mindhunter, I think, is that show,
Yeah.
and she's really good in that. But she just hasn't quite had. I mean, that was her breakthrough thing, and it never really developed from there, given how good she is as an actor.
For sure.
I'm trying to remember John Noble's character's name. But
Walter Bishop.
Walter.
Yeah,
I mean, he
Walter.
is so darn good in that.
Oh,
For
for sure.
Yeah.
That's if they had Oscars for TV. Well, I guess an Emmy. Like,
Yeah, I've heard they have this thing called Emmys.
Yeah,
Maybe
this
someday
little-
they'll get profile.
yeah. The thing that Fringe also does that I know modern shows do, especially like because they're all on Netflix and stuff, is have self-contained episodes.
Which is nice.
Like they solve the mystery by the end of the episode, and of course there's a little bit of a question of where is this going to go at the end of the episode, but it's self-contained and it feels like you've had a nice meal rather than a little morsel.
Yeah, that's true.
As like these Netflix shows which are basically just long movies and well, any streaming shows is what I mean.
Yeah, for sure.
But okay, well, that's enough of what we've been watching. It's
Yeah.
probably the longest one we've done so
I
far.
mean, yeah.
If you're listening to the 15-minute version of this, just know there's a lot on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Okay, so just like always, we'll be diving deep. Fair warning, here there be spoilers. Now our review of Frequency.
Well, we open with the sun and the sound of radio chatter before dissolving to Earth, where we see a gasoline tanker overturning on a highway.
And I just want to point out right here, this is really the only hint that this is a sci-fi movie that I almost think of it as maybe it could have been a studio note to, although the Aurora Borealis is a part of a big part of the script, but they had to get that note in there first to be like, this is where it's gonna end up. We're gonna do some sci-fi stuff, but
And
hang
it
on
somehow
there.
involves the sun.
Yeah, somehow involves the sun.
And I can somewhat explain part of that.
Yeah.
When
Well, I
it
want
comes to it.
I want to get to that when,
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
when
gonna
it
get
comes to it, yeah.
So, so you have this gasoline truck that's overturned. It's spilling gasoline. Firefighters respond. Among the firefighters is Frank Sullivan, played by Dennis Quaid, who instantly demonstrates that he's a true hero. The captain on the scene is tells him not to go underground to save workers. He goes underground and he saves the workers just before escaping the slowest gasoline explosion I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
It reminded me a little bit of that Austin Powers scene where the guy's about to get run over by the vehicle. He's like, and it's like 5 miles away. And he's like, it's 4 miles away. It's like this. You see this cloud of flame billowing,
sure.
and Dennis Quaid's staring at
He's
it.
halfway up the ladder, just staring, and he has time to climb up.
Well, he had
and
to
run.
catch his breath at some point and kind of stare at some more, and then maybe he made himself a little sandwich.
There's a little bit of crisscross in there because in Interstellar they stare at something for too long,
Yeah.
which is detrimental. But yeah, it's really interesting in that scene there because they're in underground in all of this gasoline that's been poured from the tanker, and they're at the vault, and he says, "Don't make any sparks," and he hits the hammer to open the vault, trying to not make any sparks. They open the door, and what do they see? A giant wire that's making a whole bunch of sparks that hasn't blown up this entire place for plot reasons.
Exactly. And that to me, I mean, right there, we're getting a foreshadowing of how plot things determine so much.
yeah, that's true.
But we learned that this is October 10th, 1969. So we're back in the swinging 60s. Having saved the day, Frank rides home to Queens. His loving wife, Julia, played by the wonderful Elizabeth Mitchell, speaking of lost.
Another lost connection.
Indeed.
And his son, Johnny, and his ham radio.
Yeah, I think a really interesting thing about that sequence is he doesn't even seem phased whatsoever by this incredibly dangerous thing that just happened, and he doesn't mention it to his wife or his kids.
Oh, yeah.
Just another day of being a firefighter.
Yeah, I wonder if this happens absolutely every day, and he just never mentions it because it would worry them.
Yeah. He doesn't even wash off the gasoline smell anymore because his wife would think that would be strange. Honey,
for
you don't smell like you usually do.
Yeah, and I had gasoline smell on my hands just by funneling the stuff into the car the other day.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and then we cut to the same house 30 years later, and we now see New York Police Department Detective John Sullivan watching as his girlfriend Samantha, played by Melissa Errico, walks out. And there are tears. There's a lot of protests. Clearly, we're getting very early on that John Sullivan is broken. You say?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Fortunately,
he's in the darkest timeline.
Yes, he is.
I don't know if this is the darkest timeline.
Oh,
We're going to talk
maybe
about
not the
that
darkest.
later.
Yeah. We think it's the darkest timeline.
Yeah.
Boy,
that's
we're
true.
wrong,
It goes. Yeah.
But fortunately, his good friend Gordo shows up, played by Noah Emmerich, and I think Noah Emmerich is playing the same basic character he did in the Truman Show.
That's exactly what I was going to reference.
I know, right?
And I was going to be like, I can't trust this guy because.
Hey, John, I brought back a six pack.
Yeah.
But I love how Gordo's there for John, because John's girlfriend just walked out, but he can't stop yammering about his Yahoo stock, which he never bought. So
for sure, stuck in the past.
Yes, he's stuck. That's I didn't thought about that. He's stuck in the past as well. So,
and it's really interesting in this exact scene. We see something of John's character from his interaction with Gordo's son, where Gordo's son says, "Hi, Uncle John. I'm not your uncle, kid."
Yeah.
He's not a happy man at all. So.
And I don't know if you guys noticed this, but his son was young Michael Cera.
I know.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
know.
Very
I didn't
young
catch that
Michael
until
Cera.
I rewatched it just to rewrite a note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to see. That's another thing we're going to see in Interstellar as well.
Yeah,
which is one of the young sons being played by a future big movie star. So.
Hidden behind his future self.
And Gordy plays a very important role in the movie because he's the one who finds Chekhov's shotgun.
It's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because he's while Gordo and John are tossing back beers, Gordy is fishing through a under the stairs closet, and he finds this fire department in New York locker containing the shotgun and an old ham radio. Mm-hmm. And so Gordo sets it up, and Gordo and Gordy leave John to go through a scrapbook. And this is, I kind of think this is a nice way to kind of give you a brief sense as to both what's happened over the past 30 years and how John's a prisoner of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he can't get over the fact that his father, Frank, died 30 years before in a firefighting incident. One where apparently going in reeking of gasoline did not really pay off for him. So, so that gives us our introduction to the two central characters.
For sure.
And then the radio comes to life.
Indeed.
And
it's interesting. Right before the radio comes to life, he's looking at the TV, watching shows, and it passes through a TV show where they're talking about their dads. Mm-hmm. So he switches the channel to instead it being a lonely little polar bear that's lost away from his family. Mm-hmm. And then he switches it to a science documentary about string theory, trying to throw in some of the science that...
And sunspot activity. I think they mentioned the word sunspot, yeah.
They mentioned sunspots and Aurora Borealis, and the scientist said, well, Aurora Borealis, we already understand that completely. Let me talk about string theory.
And of course, it's and this gets to something we could definitely talk about during the crisscross, but how it's just such an inelegant science dump. It's like, we're going to pretend this is science by mentioning string theory and sunspots and Aurora Borealis, and we're just going to say, hey, this is all scientific.
We'll make a science gumbo and just eat it.
For sure.
And we're going to do it right before the radio comes to life. Mm-hmm. And there's a guy on the other end, and John starts chatting with him, and turns out, hey, they're both from Queens, and hey, they're both Mets fans, and the Mets in the World Series. Hey, the Mets haven't been in the World Series since whatever, and so we're kind of getting the some very inelegant setting up. At least I felt, because it's pretty obvious to both of to the viewers what's going on, but we're supposed to believe that these guys are just kind of
Well, I like that. There's no particular point at which you're supposed to realize. It's like people are going to realize any point along that scene like, oh, it's his dad. But I like that they play it out long enough where like people that won't get it right away, like there's enough hints in there and it's like, oh, okay. Like people will get it at different moments, but it works that way. Like it's not like a reveal where if they don't get it soon enough, it ruins the story. Like,
they give several opportunities.
Yeah, for me, it was the cutting and the fact that it was pretty. And this is where it's talking about suspending disbelief. The fact that he couldn't recognize his father's voice, maybe because he was 6 when his father died, but to me,
there was a lot of distortion.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah,
Aurora Borealis really distorts things, as well as extends the range of radios. I think that's probably what they were trying to go with. You can talk to China with the Aurora Borealis.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if it could go a little further than China, if you know what I mean.
Well, maybe you could talk to, say, the Qianlong Emperor in China 300 years ago.
I think that's exactly what the screenwriter was. He was listening to a science thing, and they're like, "Oh, you can project the signal can go very long ways." Like, oh, what if it went back in time?
Yeah. Funnily enough, I took a glance at the script while I was trying to write down the screen list, and it actually never mentioned Aurora Borealis at all in there. It started out the whole movie not with the sun, but with a quote from Stephen Hawking about black holes and time travel. So that's sort of interesting. Little relation there between the two movies.
There's one thing that happens, though, which is that after speaking to John, Frank gets up to go tuck Johnny in.
Yes.
And when he does so, he breaks a pane of glass.
Tripping over the Dalmatian.
Yeah. And then in 1999, we see that that same pane of glass is broken.
Yeah.
And of course, John doesn't even think twice about this.
For sure.
And this is where you're seeing them laying the groundwork for the idea that things that happened in 1969 will change what is the way in 1999.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they don't show the window before, so it's hinting at it rather than showing you directly.
Yes.
But they linger on it, which makes you think, wait.
Yeah.
Was that there before? And there's
but
no
at the very least,
yet.
it establishes that this is the fact that it's the exact same shape of crack and everything.
For
that
sure.
This is the same place.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Then we see Frank, settling in with his neighbors in 1969 to watch the World Series, while his son, 30 years in the future, is at the scene where a skeleton has been discovered. After, doing various police work, he goes and checks on his mother, where they reminisce that it's been virtually 30 years to the day since his father died.
I think, okay, this is a really odd
Go on.
note, but I thought it was really weird that he owned his parents' house and his mom lived in an apartment somewhere else. It's like, why doesn't she live in the house and he lives in an apartment? And I guess it's a plot contrivance of he needs to be in the same space his dad was in. But
also, she needs to be away from that space, so the reveal later is more unexpected for him.
Yeah, for sure.
But I can also see how when people get older, they downsize. They don't why do they have to take care of as much space, especially if they're living on their own. And I guess the one thing that would make John Sullivan's life sadder is if he was a 36-year-old police officer living with his mother.
yeah.
So,
But at least he would have that connection.
yes.
Yeah. But he has no one there. He's alone.
Yes, he is very alone. He has his mother, but it's indirect.
And a thing about that transition where they were watching the World Series and then going to the crime scene is there is another character that is the same between the timelines. Satch.
Yes.
Who gave him and Gordo tickets to whichever game of the World Series.
Yeah.
And then there he is again, and they're working together.
Satch, played by the great Andre Braugher.
Yeah,
for
who,
sure.
Of Brooklyn Nine-Nine fame.
Yeah.
I feel like, we're getting foreshadowing of Raymond Holt.
I know, right?
But what we get is Satch plays an important superior roles. Among the least of which is that's why, as we'll find out later, why John becomes a cop. He's the reason.
For sure. He's like his new father figure or something like that.
But the implication was that there's that influence even before, because there's that later on about how I thought you'd grow out of the cop thing, and it turned out it was Satch's influence.
For sure.
But and he's an example. I mean, the cast in this movie is really good.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a really. I mean, there's some performances that are better than others, but but it's just, I mean, seeing Andre Braugher there just makes you realize how
there's
he is.
there's some great scenes with him later on where there's some kind of hokey dialogue, but he really plays it very well.
Yeah, he thinks he
so
does
good.
it well.
Yeah. So, John goes back home. He hears Frank on the radio. Frank has seen Game 1 of the 1969 World Series. Mm-hmm. The Mets are playing whomever. And he's marveling at how John predicted the outcome of the first game of the series. Mm-hmm. And John's like, what do you mean predicted? It happened 30 years ago. And then he hears his younger self on the other end talking to his father, and hears Frank saying "Little Chief," and he starts interrogating Frank, and Frank freaks out and he drops his cigarette on the desk and it burns a hole, and John watches the burn materialize on his desk as that is happening.
Yeah.
I like what they're doing here, which is they're establishing the mechanics and the way this works. And this is where the film was giving me a headache after, because I'm trying to figure out how it works. Uh-huh. The way I figure is that they're exactly 30 years apart. Mm-hmm. That Frank is in October 11th, 1969, and his son is in October 11th, 1999. And that they're kind of moving on parallel times. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that changes that happen at that moment in 1969 transfer to John immediately 30 years later. Mm-hmm. But we're going to put a pin on that because I don't know if that is consistent throughout the movie.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
So,
but generally speaking, I've never seen this in any other time travel movie of any variety. 2 times being inexplicably directly linked.
Yes.
Most other movies that would follow this general trend of time travel, where what you do in the past can change the future. There's different types of time travel. One of them is that if it happens, it always happened. This one falls into the realm that you can change the past. Mm-hmm. But any other movie, as soon as something happened, as soon as John said a thing, it would have immediately perpetuated all of the things that changed. But it waits until Frank does the thing. We can talk a little bit more in detail for the examples of that.
Yeah, that'll help.
and I'll get to where I first have my what moment in just a little bit. But this is where John's realizing that something as strange is going on. But it freaks Frank out, and Frank does the typical dad thing, which is, you stay away from my son. Mm-hmm. And
which is understandable. You've got a grown man on the other end of this thing saying he's your son, and
but more importantly, he's telling his dad, you're gonna die tomorrow.
Yeah,
mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's the key thing. John realizes as soon as he realizes this is his dad, and that it's October 11th, 1969, mm-hmm. that the next day his father is going to die in a warehouse fire, and he is warning him off. And I totally get Frank's perspective.
Sure. Could read as a threat from the other side,
especially since this guy is obviously looking through his window since he saw him burn the desk.
But he can't entirely dismiss it, nor can he dismiss it because John says, "You got to believe me," and he predicts what's going to happen in the next game of the World Series. So you get this next scene where it's October 12th.
I'm just going to say this is the end of Act 1. Here.
That makes sense.
Burning of the desk scene, end of Act 1. So now...
everybody's established.
Yeah, everything's established. John knows that the time thing's going on. The dad doesn't believe yet.
Yeah,
so
makes sense.
And we go into Act 2.
So we have opening of Act 2, which is the men at the firehouse are clustered around the television watching the game 2, and Frank is off to one side, nervously smoking a cigarette. Now, Dennis Quaid, I don't think he's ever quite gotten the appreciation for an actor as an actor that
for sure
that he probably deserves. But I mean, he does such a good job of selling this kind of this nervousness. You could tell he's shook.
Indeed.
And it's not just the fact that you could. It's a great way of, without using any dialogue, of communicating. He's not certain what to believe. Mm-hmm. He can't entirely dismiss John. John predicted game 1. He's made a prediction for game 2. He's basically watching the game from a distance, trying to figure out if it's true. But in the middle of the game, or near the end of the game,
right after the thing that John said would happen, that happens.
I thought it was right before that happened.
Like,
because I think he calls the end of the game, and the game ends.
A thing in the game, but then he learns the end of the game later.
Yeah, but
it's an interesting sequence.
He learns the game. He learns the game on the drive over, or on the ride over to the warehouse fire, and that's when he starts to really do this. But he's a firefighter, so whereas most people thought would be, well, maybe I just won't show up to the warehouse, or I'll go off and have an extended pee break while the building goes up. He's going to do his job
for sure.
And so they learn that someone's trapped on the top floor. Frank and another firefighter run in.
Wait, okay, I'm just going to insert here.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting idea of just. And just that feeling of it, it has this feeling of fate to it, of
for
like,
sure.
if you know you're going to die, do you still go to work and do your job?
Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting for me in that sequence is he gets there and they say, oh, it's empty, we're just going to watch. And there's that relief. It's like, okay, he was wrong. Nope, there's somebody in there. Okay, maybe he was right.
Yeah, they really play with the...
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting, though, getting back to what you were just describing, Aaron, which is that the notion of that, we're going to do our jobs, because that comes up a little bit later when it comes to the question of what Julie is going to do. When this idea that Julie might be murdered, and the first thought is, well, Julie just won't go to work. Yeah. And that'll solve it. But that's not really, how they do things.
Yeah, for sure.
So that theme comes up again. So what you're really getting, I think, is the sense of, and this is one of the things that I thought really distinguished the two movies, and I know this is probably better safe for crisscross, but what we're getting here, all of the main characters are very working class. These are men and women who just go and do their jobs, and they have good families. It's a very positive depiction of the working class. All of them, happen to be civil service, basically, but nonetheless, it's this idea that even it's like, it's not as though Frank's life is never in danger. It's just that up until then, dangers have been very hypothetical and or theoretical, and now it's this idea that not only is it a real danger, but it's one that he's been told you're not going to live because of this decision you make. So he finds the girl unconscious. He's going to get her out the window, but that ladder's being funky, so he's got to find another way down as everything's going up in flames, and he's about to go one way, he goes the other way. It's a really neat shoot. I mean, I kind of felt like that they were maybe laying the groundwork for if Frequency ever became a ride at a park, the fire slide ride. Because he's going down and down and down, and he...
And the thing, though, is he throws... And there's really no... I don't know if there's a real reason for this, but he throws the helmet out the window, and the helmet is falling as... What is falling in present time?
A glass.
Yeah, a glass is falling off the table. There's
another scene that's happening at the same time.
And that go ahead.
Every time there's a change to signal it, which is a really clever thing. Indeed. Because it could just... things be changing everywhere and you don't even know. To signal the change, they have one thing falling, and they do it very visually, which is great for a movie.
Sure.
They have so in this case, they have the helmet falling to the ground outside and the cup of water falling off the desk. It's very Inception.
No, it's not a cup of water. It is a glass of
whatever alcohol they have at the bar.
And that's where we get to my first big pet peeve about the movie. Okay. The glass that's being dropped was the one that John was holding while he was in the middle of a lunch with Gordo and Satch toasting the 30th anniversary of his father's death. Okay, now his father's alive. So why are they there at that lunch?
Oh, that's true.
It seems to establish this sense of time travel in the movie, where if something has happened for John already, it happened in the new timeline, just in a slightly different context.
Yeah, but the thing is, that wasn't true for Gordo and Satch. It would have been much more interesting if he looked up and he was alone at the pub.
Yeah, that could have
But instead he's there. It's like, okay, why are John and Gordo and Satch in this one place having this in the middle of this toast?
Yeah,
Nothing else has changed. And as we see later in the movie, it's like when a change takes place, it can warp everything.
For storytelling wise,
Yeah, for
I
sure.
can see why they kept
It
them
needed to
there
be
because they
efficient.
needed to have somebody there that didn't remember.
So we could
But
immediately
why
have
they're
that.
there- yeah.
Is my dad dead? No, of course he's not dead. If he was alone, then we would have to
If it were a book, he
spend
could be
time.
realizing
And there are ways they could have filled that in. It was just the fact that it goes to the mechanics of how things change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to say that is that these changes, it's kind of like a butterfly effect thing for me,
Yeah.
which is that it's like things change unless it's convenient for the storyline that they don't.
Yeah.
And we can talk more about that when we have more examples to pull upon.
Yes, but I mean, this is the one where I started feeling as though
Yeah,
the
there
mechanics
can be
really
a
weren't
disconnect
working.
potentially.
Yeah.
When anything takes you out of a movie, it has to be questioned.
I mean, it would have been really interesting if they had it to where the glass and the helmet are falling, and then the helmet hits the ground and the glass vanishes because now he's no longer toasting his father's death.
Well, that would cause more questions too.
It would cause for us and for him, but it wouldn't cause any questions for Gordo and Satch because for them it's just
Well, it could be they could just play it where they're not there anymore, and I don't know.
it's a possibility.
But yeah, okay, it's a flaw. We'll acknowledge.
Yes.
Put a pin here. This is a flaw.
We'll put a pin
and we'll
there
keep going.
because we'll discuss the whole
big red pen,
whole thing
and I'm going to
when
be
we
I might be
have all
cycling
of the
back to it
other
later on.
things.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Because our evidences have not been discussed yet.
Okay. So now John returns home and then he sees these, and it's a really great sequence of his father writing words in 1969 into the desk, and they're appearing in 1999.
Did we have the part where his memories flash back?
Yeah, well, that's happening as the glass is
That was-
falling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he
He doesn't describe it though.
let me-
but
he's
the
got
sequence is great.
he's got an upload of the memories.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Let me just cover that real
Yeah,
quick
for
because
sure.
I love that.
Definitely, it was
That's-
a great sequence.
As a very visual storytelling, and you feel it in the moment.
sure.
Of it, it's interesting. You'd think you'd almost need another Act 1 to set up all this stuff that he's seeing, but they do a great shorthand job of making you experience all the things that didn't happen that have now happened.
And many
because
of those
his dad's
things
alive.
reoccur in the exact same picture reoccurs several times. Whenever a change happens, it's the same picture with a new change in it. That sort of thing. So it's easy to understand what's happening.
Yeah, and I do like that because it is the sense of how, for him, he has lived those things now, but in terms of that nexus of change, they're all basically memories flooding in. He's going to remember them as these kind of hazy recollections rather than having, kind of experienced them in real time.
Yeah, I like how he describes it later, where he talks about it as like waking up from a dream, and he doesn't know what is a dream and what's real, and there's all these real memories that have come back to him.
Which is very rare in time travel things where, like Back to the Future is probably the prime example for you.
Yeah.
You go back in time, you change something, and it changes something. No memory perpetuation. It's just you're lost in this new world. But with him, he has the memories that have flooded in.
And that's because he's not back in the past changing things.
Yeah, for sure.
He is and so he is being changed, but it's done in a way to where he can remember the fact that things are changing.
Yeah,
so he's not he's not talking to his father now trying to convince him to stop smoking because he's always, his only memories of him dying in 1989. He's got the realization of what he's doing.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
When Marty McFly did the thing changing his parents in the past, if his memory perpetuated, he would not exist immediately.
Yeah.
So every movie has its own rules.
So, and here's where we get to one, and I can kind of work my way around it, but I can't quite. But before we get to that,
Yeah,
though,
go on.
You get this. What's one of my favorite sequences, which is this long and heartfelt conversation. It's the first time that both men realize what they have, acknowledge it, and they bond.
For sure.
Yeah. I like that they don't, this is jumping back to the first conversation, but I like that they don't have him having to tell him he's from the future and trying to convince him that, because he is just as not in the know as he is. He doesn't know what's going on with this voodoo whatever magic.
They're both
science.
everymen.
Yeah. But for Frank, it's something that,
Yeah.
I mean, for both of them, it's kind of unique in a way. It's a little bit less unique for John now, because now he has another 2 decades of memories of his dad that he's trying to sort through. But for his father, he gets this wonderful ability to see what his son has done with his life.
Yeah.
For sure.
And he's got that kind of that superficial disappointment that he never became a firefighter. He became a cop instead. But nonetheless, he gets to find out that his son has grown up. He is a successful NYPD detective. Okay, maybe the personal life isn't quite working out as well as he thought, but nonetheless, it is what it is.
Yeah, he's happy for his son.
He's happy for his son.
Okay, I just want to discuss the cinematography of this scene real quick, because it's very simple, but it is very effective. You've got them in different times, but there's the reverse profile shots of you've got them. It's as if they're talking to each other right face to face.
Yes,
but which is interesting because they're both facing the same wall
In the same
but
seat at the same
it's
table.
kind of a Gollum type thing where
That's right.
they reverse the angle. But
did you notice the other element there?
So-
Which is that Frank, and maybe I'm reading into it, but Frank in 1969, they're shooting him with warm tones.
Oh.
And in John, it's blue tones.
yeah.
Firefighter,
I didn't
police
catch that.
officer.
Oh,
That
okay.
makes sense.
Well, I'd say that's more for the emotional thing of
But-
he's kind of in this present that is life is not good for him, and he's back in the good old days.
It's
But it
great
also-
how many
yeah.
levels there are.
Yeah, but it also plays the role. It's subtle things like that which it's kind of that make me not hate the movie. I just get deeply frustrated with certain
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that this conversation involves the first time that "I love you" is said in the movie, and they say it together.
Really, I did not know that.
'Cause-
I
which
missed that.
probably implies that Frank probably never said it to his son, and now that he knows that his son lost him and so on and so forth, he's reminded. Maybe I should tell him.
Of that impact, yeah.
Yeah.
And you see that when he goes checks on
For sure.
little John, but
Yeah.
but then but after they sign off, John calls his mother and
Yeah.
says, "Oh,
Sorry, I just had one more note. Sorry,
Yeah,
we
for
keep
sure.
interrupting.
No, that's all right.
When they were having this big scene where they're talking back and forth and he's telling him all this stuff about the future, I'm like, you are giving him forbidden knowledge.
That's funny.
oh, I almost thank you because I almost forgot my note there, which is that why aren't they having a Gray Sports Almanac moment? It's like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
Dad, you want to bet on the '86 Giants, you
Yeah.
want to bet on this, you want to bet on that, and we're gonna make so much money.
But
Well-
they're implying this night-long conversation where he's giving him all this information about the future.
Including
And
the
it's-
next few games of the 1969 World Series where his dad could make a match.
I mean, it does set up their characters.
Yes.
I mean, we clearly have this materialistic character in Gordo,
yes.
but they're not that materialistic character.
Yes.
They're just about the connection. Apparently, that's what it seems to be establishing.
And that's an excellent point, which is that you're getting their inherent goodness. They're focusing more upon their moment. They're focusing more upon their family, but at the same time,
That's true.
And
Yeah,
this
for
is
sure.
the Back to the Future 2 influence. I'm just
it's true.
just tell them about Secretariat or something.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? What's going to be great for mom's retirement, so she's not working as a nurse 30 years from now, is if you invest
Yeah,
in this.
there is that
Yeah.
that one.
So.
And it's really funny because John does bring up the fact that cigarettes will kill him, but he's still in denial.
Yes.
Even though he knows the future, he's in denial that
Yeah.
cigarettes are bad.
Well, I mean, how could John really complain? Because he's sitting there smoking too. It's like
Yeah, my mom
Yeah.
noticed that too.
That's right.
it's like
that's right.
yeah, cigarettes are going to kill you.
That's right.
But so after they sign off, John calls his mother, leaves a message, and then Frank goes to the hospital to visit Julia, and while he's there, she interrupts a doctor who is about to incorrectly administer medication to a patient, and then John, I'm trying to figure out what the sequence is here. Okay, yeah, that night, then John goes to bed. He has nightmares. He wakes up.
That's right.
He.
Before we get past this,
Yeah, go
this
on.
is another. I forget what drops, but two parallel dropping things in the past and the
I didn't
present.
look back at it, but there was definitely the necklace in the past, but I don't remember if for this specific one there was a present, since there was no one awake at the moment.
Oh yeah.
But maybe I don't remember.
Well,
It might have been like
there
an
was a
alarm
dropping
clock
thing
that
to
he-
signal there's going to be a change.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a continual motion.
And
But I think that was
Yeah.
just in the dream.
Unless
yeah,
there was
probably.
an alarm clock, I didn't realize.
I love the feeling that you get as he's tossing and turning in bed, of just that anguished feeling of getting all these new memories, and it's like a tortured dream, and the only thing is when he wakes up it's real.
Yeah.
So
And it kind of, again, reinforces the notion of he can't sort out the dreams from the reality. So
sure.
he calls his mother,
Indeed.
and only it doesn't go to his mother, it goes to a deli.
Noah's Deli.
You know,
He does it twice.
Yes. So this makes no sense, because why wouldn't his mother have been dead after they signed off the night before?
That comes to the whole parallel timeline thing.
It does, but at the same time,
yeah.
if that's only, but if the changes, I just
So jumping back just as an
Yeah.
evidence, you remember when he was writing on the desk with the wood burner?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't suddenly there was this message on the desk.
It's
It was
happening
this
in-
message is being written at this exact moment.
Yeah,
So Frank
this is
could
the.
have. Yeah, go on.
Well, make your point real quick, and then I'll.
because then why would John remember? Why would there be any other flood of changes that John would have remembered after the moment his father lived? Because he is. It's where, and this is where I start to feel like that Toby Emmerich, who's the writer, he's playing fast and loose with the rules, which is that, I mean, it's a great sequence as you're describing, the dream sequence. It really is a neat sequence, but it's one of those ones where I feel like if he had simply taken out the whole him calling his mom before he goes to bed and leaving the message, it would have been fine, because then it would have been he's not aware that his because you create a sequence where they hang up, and then the mother is alive after that, but then she's not. He goes to bed, she's still alive, and yet at some point there's a change that should have already happened, but
Interesting.
didn't.
Oh, I see.
So the phone call happened after the hospital, where he left a message, or was that before the
Well,
hospital?
what he does in the film, it's,
Okay. This is what happens in the movie. The change happens it's a little bit loose with how it works, but it's just I don't know. He could be in bed at the same time that he's at the hospital, but it's the interaction that he has at the hospital with
Yeah.
his wife
That's the thing
that
that
causes
changes
it.
But
It's not something during their conversation.
from John's perspective, that conversation should have happened, at the very least, would have been his past the moment he hung up with Frank.
True, but that would also mean that back when he told his dad that he was going to die tomorrow, immediately it should have been perpetuated, but it wasn't.
Yeah,
Because their
it's-
timelines are they're
in
not
sync.
not separable.
And that's the only way I can really reconcile,
Yeah,
and yet it still does not feel like, and again, it's...
Okay. I'm going to go into why I love this. Okay.
go on.
Okay, go ahead.
So, like most time travel movies, the way they do it is they're like, it is like that with Back to the Future, and I think you might be stuck in Back to the Future brain,
That
maybe.
is true.
Yeah,
But it's immediately when you mess something up, it changes the future. Okay, they're separate, but the way that the reason I love this is because, oh geez, what was it? This is what happens with time travel movies.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll bring it up later. I've got a note for it, but I'll say what it is. I just can't put a pin on it.
The thing that it reminds me of is the fact that these two have complete free will still, and that the time can't perpetuate. Until Frank
that's
does
what I
the
was
thing,
getting at.
in
I was
essence.
just
Yeah.
So
I guess technically,
they have free will, but also
Yeah.
the story has dramatic tension.
yeah, for sure.
because it whatever he does, they affect each other at the same time.
Yeah, they're linked.
Okay, I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
I mean,
Go on.
I think that is a very good explanation.
So he doesn't have any precognition of stuff. That's the biggest thing. Neither of them know what's going to... Well, he knows the past, but
basically
other than
from
that,
the moment
Yeah, go on.
that he hangs up with Frank, or he signs off with Frank, all those changes that take place from that moment onward should already be internalized in the timeline.
No, that's not how it works.
Only because...
That's the point at which there's a branch that goes off where things are different now. And then once he gets to the hospital, that's when he affects the wife. And that's when that changes.
But then...
And the guy that she's... I don't know if you picked up on this. The guy that she's treating in the bed is the serial killer.
you know, I get
Yeah,
that.
for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
I get that. That's that change takes place, which is why the Nightingale Killer, triples the body count.
Yeah.
But it's the... I mean, I kind of got to the same place that the two of you are at, but there's a point later in the movie where they go with a different direction.
So how about we
Yeah,
put
well,
a pin in this?
yeah.
And
Yes,
talk
we'll put a
about
pin in this.
that
Okay,
when it
we'll
so-
do it when we get there.
so that we can have better...
But
yeah.
we will get to... But
We keep getting in these
Yes.
time
I know,
travel
right?
whirlpools.
We'll hold off the actual time travel discussion until we get to the where it
okay.
is in question.
But this is but so John's kind of he's kind of gobsmacked by the fact that the future's been changed. John's still reeling from the realization that his mother's now dead. He goes to work, and that's when he finds out from Satch that, first of all, the skeleton they found is another victim of the Nightingale Killer, and one that predates the previous victims. But John says, I guess that makes a third, and Satch says, no, it's the 10th. And that's when John finds out, one, that the Nightingale Killer is now something's happened to make the Nightingale Killer more prolific, and that his mother's one of the victims. And it's kind of this neat thing where it's like, where now it's the idea that John's life is miserable because he's been obsessed with catching this guy who killed his mother.
For sure.
Which I do like that. But so then John goes home that night.
Real quick about that particular scene, we see a major difference with the relationship of John and Satch. So
Yes.
when he's in the bathroom,
Yeah,
Satch has a bad relationship with him, saying, "You can disrespect yourself all you like, but don't disrespect me or them out there."
He's gone from being the surrogate father
And
to...
he has this sour look even as he's going to the
Sure.
bathroom.
Yeah. So apparently John, without his dad, is sort of broken and a workaholic, but without his mom, his relationships just crumble.
Well, it could also be that Satch, stepped into has a more intimate connection with John because he filled in when Frank died.
Yeah,
But
there's
now
that
it's much
aspect.
more professional.
For sure.
And also the fact that you get from the way he talks about how John's go over the file 1,000 times, he really feels that John just is is unhealthily obsessed
Yeah,
with this.
there is that for sure. And it's interesting. Just a little thing that they point at is they want to make they want you to absolutely know that this body that they found hasn't changed. It's the exact same body because they zoom in on this whatever bandage or something that was on her arm, and we keep on seeing that bandage picture. Whenever times change, that stays the same. So they just wanted to make sure you knew that this was the same body. This apparently the first of the guy's murders.
Yeah.
So, but now John has a new purpose with the connection, and he tells Frank about that Julie's going to die, and that and Frank is really at sea because he's a great firefighter. He doesn't know the first thing about police work.
Yeah.
But John says,
It's like if I went to Joseph's work in his body and I'm like, oh, I gotta, no way I could do rocket science.
Rocket science and things. You send it into space,
I don't know how to do
but
rocket surgery.
you're going to tell him how to do it over the phone, which is
Over the
basically what
phone.
John's doing here. So.
Yeah.
So the next victim is Carrie Reynolds, but as they're kind of working out their plan, young Johnny's there, young Gordo's there, and John literally plays Santa Claus. And this to me is there's so much that is 90s about this movie. The idea of Yahoo stock being the path to riches.
It would be Google nowadays.
Or Apple or Google maybe, because I think Google was just taking off around then. But I mean, Apple was a pretty big stock. But it's just like the idea of Yahoo's still a thing. They're still a prosperous company. But the idea of Yahoo becoming like the big deal.
Yeah,
it's just like, I guess you.
My mom has a Yahoo email address. That's about all I
exactly
encounter it.
Old email address.
Yeah, exactly. And the stock is probably a fraction of the value of Apple's if you had bought both of them at the same time. So, but it's just like you might as well throw in like a Pepsi endorsement. That's back right. It's so 1990s. And then of course we don't see Gordo again until the very end of the movie because now
for sure.
that has changed. So.
And I think. This interaction between John and Gordo, it really shows John's love of Gordo because Gordo's only said one thing. Might as well give him that one thing to make him happy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right, now back to...
You're not going to drum into his head. Of course, I don't know if you ever had the opportunity to get on Apple stock when he was at such a early stage. But anyhow, so Frank, because he is shadowing Carrie...
Okay, let me mention real quick just something that's mentioned in this conversation between his dad. That the dad is just worried about saving the mom, and then you can tell that John is a good cop because he's like, what about all the other victims? We could save all of them.
And it's also interesting because we see, I mean, in Frank's, while Frank is a good man and he does the right thing, it's that instinctive first reaction to protect you and your own. It's a very understandable reaction.
Yeah, for sure.
And once John points out, well, we have to save these other women as well. So Frank goes to the bar. He's hoping to identify the killer and save Carrie.
And I'm just going to mention real quick, this is the midpoint, that conversation.
That makes sense.
Where both of them go from being reactive to being proactive.
Yep. They were in the pan. They got out of the pan by saving the dad. They went into the fire. The mom is dead.
Yeah.
Well, there's more fire to get into, but we'll get there.
There's lots of stuff.
Yeah.
But he does save Carrie Reynolds, but he doesn't identify the killer. John's trying to, sleuth it on his end, and then he chases a red herring while Frank is shadowing the next victim, Sissy Clark. But while he's in the bathroom, he gets ambushed. He's left unconscious.
By the killer.
By the killer. Yeah, I should make that clear. Although, I mean, we can assume that, but it's not clear until he wakes up, goes to Sissy's apartment, and he sees that Sissy's dead. Mm-hmm. And he goes back. He tells John that he was ambushed, Sissy's dead, and that the killer has taken his driver's license. And John, being a good cop, recognizes, hey, he probably left a fingerprint. And this is, I think, my favorite time-related sequence of it.
Yeah,
it's
sure,
so cool.
The wallet.
Yeah, and the way that they do it, where it's like you're seeing these two actions that are happening simultaneously in terms of the two timelines, and yet there's this huge 30-year gap. Yeah. And yet the way that they nicely kind of build the suspense of, he's putting it away and then he's ripping it up, like you'd not know it's there, and it's just been sitting there for 30 years.
Yeah. I have one note for this that I put on here that I just wrote. Time travel detectives, so cool.
When I was watching, I was thinking, with how it works, he could have his dad take it back now that he knows who the guy is. But they did need the fingerprints as evidence.
Yes.
To catch him later. So, okay, fine. The dad is without his wallet and all of his stuff that he has in there for 30 years.
Didn't he?
Oh, that's true.
It was, he didn't take anything else out of it. He just took it, put it in the bag, unless it was off screen, maybe. Yeah. But he didn't want to disturb the fingerprints.
He just lived in squalor until...
Well, it's not like they had debit cards back then.
It's true, so it really wasn't that big of a deal.
Just put his cash in his pocket.
The guy already took his driver's license and everything, so...
Which was the one key thing, so...
Yeah.
But this gives John opportunity to finally identify who the Nightingale killer was, and it was a cop named Jack Shepard. Mm-hmm. And this is where we, get to
Big twist that it's a cop.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Dum,
sure.
dum, dum.
I mean, there was some foreshadowing.
But now we get this. You get the nice sequence where John goes and finds Shepard in 1999.
Do you mean Mr. Shepard, his father, who's alive?
Well, he finds the father first and gets some of the backstory that Shepard's no longer a cop. He then goes and finds Shepard at the bar.
Confronting the guy.
Yeah, and he rattles his cage a little bit.
Before we jump into that, just jumping back to Mr. Shepard's house, we discover that this cop who had died the last time that he talked to Mr. Shepard, he was fired because of corruption, and apparently his mom is dead, and she was a nurse. And he didn't say that his mom was one of the Nightingale murders, so that's sort of interesting. She just died by a horrible, horrible murder. So that's interesting.
Like maybe that was
Wink.
the first one.
Wink sort of thing that they were doing to us.
So, but John has a plan to stop the murders in 1969. He's telling his father the plan, which is we're going to just bypass the NYPD. We're going to go to the FBI. You just need to make it one anonymous phone call, and that'll put Hoover's boys on it, and this will be fixed. But as he's explaining this, Satch and his partner show up to arrest Frank on suspicion of having murdered Sissy because Shepard planted the driver's license there. Fingerprints are on the scene. There's a witness who saw Frank there. And in the scuffle, they break the radio.
And at the same time, the radio is falling.
Yeah, the same
face
radio
ball is
in different
falling.
times
Yes.
drops and it breaks.
Okay.
Okay, let me. I missed a couple notes.
Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
on, throw 'em in.
Okay, so when I guess he's interrogating the dad, and he's like, there's a great line in there. He's like, "You went down 30 years ago. You just don't know it yet."
Yeah, that is a great line.
That was confronting the guy at the bar. Yep,
Oh,
that was
okay,
a
yeah.
good line. And another thing that comes up later is he said that when the murderer is saying, "Why are you here?" and he said, "Stealing your life away. You went down 30 years ago."
Yeah,
And
great.
"Stealing your life away" is a line that comes up later.
Yeah, I mean, I do like those lines, but I really don't like the sequence because what they have just done is they have made the entire movie up to this point impossible because now the radio's been broken for 30 years. So how is John talking to
Okay,
Frank?
so in the past it doesn't mess it up, but in the present that would.
Because
No. Oh no. Okay, that doesn't. Okay, let me show you. In 1969, all the way up to this point, he's been using the radio. Now it breaks. That messes it up.
So
Yes,
it's
so-
But it
interesting,
only
yeah.
messes it up after this point. The stuff that's already happened
but now
has happened already.
But we've created basically a grandfather paradox because John
Oh,
never
there's a
repairs-
big one in Interstellar.
Yeah, yes, I know. Well, actually, that's there's more of a bootstrap thing.
Okay.
Okay.
So
because remember the radio does not get repaired,
until later.
and we have that sequence where we're seeing the radio being repaired. But the thing is that if the radio is broken in 1969, at that point it never. And what we see in 1999 is that the radio has never been repaired,
That's correct.
which means that the radio should never have worked for the past 3 days.
So that's a very interesting thing that I didn't pick up on. But his memories are all still there.
Okay, it didn't change until the point that it breaks. So as long as he fixes it after that, it still works.
So in essence, I
see what you're
my-
saying. It
yeah.
kind of goes
Indeed,
drunk, dunk.
we'll wait for the
I broke the
microphone,
mic
yeah.
trying to describe time travel.
But in essence, generally speaking, with my rocket scientist mind, I thought about all the physics and things about it. But generally speaking, I didn't realize that aspect there, but it doesn't necessarily break things because his memories are still there.
But this is what. But,
So he remembers both timelines.
well, it's not a matter of memory. It's a matter of the fact that the events then never could have happened in the timeline. Period.
But the thing is, with this movie, it establishes that when something happens and you're connected to this link, you remember everything.
It just it just really bothers me that we have to put this much effort into trying to explain what the writer should have done.
Yeah, there is that. There is that concept.
Yeah, and this is kind of what bugs. I mean, I do that with movies.
This is a thing that's easy as a writer to not see that side of it.
Yeah.
And it's only, and from a Hollywood point of view, like you don't have, the way that I write scripts, I send it out to lots of readers, and I would have picked up on that and been able to fix that somehow. But many Hollywood scripts, they get read by people in the studio and stuff, but.
And frankly, not all of them are really, they're focused on different things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of ways you would without having to necessarily break the entire radio. It's just now we're sitting here trying to, rationalize away using the structure. But yeah, exactly. So
that would be really interesting. Well, that is strange because.
Okay, I still think it might work. I'm just trying to figure out.
We can talk
how it
about
works.
that with the end. At the end,
we'll get
the
to
last
the.
thing
we
that
shouldn't
happens.
have to do this for a movie, though. That's my point.
There is that. You really shouldn't have to have a rocket scientist to figure this out.
It's reaching a point
But
where
we got one anyway.
it's reaching a point where I want to be paid to having co-written this movie.
That's right.
Because I'm having to alter the script to make it work.
Yeah, that's.
I think there's a description baked in, but we'll get there.
Yes.
Anyway, let's continue for sure.
But now Frank's in custody, and he's being interrogated by Satch, and he explains.
My mom left the room at this point. Like it was
it was intense.
It was very intense. Just this part.
It is. I mean, but Frank is very open about. He tries to convince Satch about this, and of course, you totally understand Satch's viewpoint, which is that
for sure.
Okay, you have a radio connection with the future, right? But Frank, lays on him some predictions for the current game of the World Series. Frank or Satch's Julius shows up, and she and Satch go to a diner, and they're talking, and Satch sees the game being played, and he sees what Frank's predicted, so now he realizes that Frank might be right.
And this sequence is really interesting because it's very heavy in the suspense.
Yes.
It's they're in the cafe. Yeah, they're in the cafe talking about this sort of thing as Frank is also in the precinct where they're doing this side thing where, in essence, when I was looking at Satch talking to Julia, he was talking about all these sorts of crime things about her husband, and I was thinking, stop talking about crime. You need to watch baseball.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, that's perfect.
It is.
Stop talking about baseball. There's a bomb under there for anybody that doesn't know the Hitchcock reference.
But but of course, the suspense is ratcheted up by the fact that while they're having this conversation, Shepard is at the police station, and he is going and interrogating. He of course wants a one-on-one with Frank, with the implication being, of course, that Frank will suffer a mysterious accident or something like that. But Satch's partner is there, and Shepard goes off with him, kind of tries to allay his suspicions. And what I love about this part is that Frank uses his skills as a firefighter.
For sure.
He's not a cop. You figure he's probably not going to be able to beat Shepard in a fist fight, but he knows things like electrical hazards. He knows things like puddles, and so he sets it up to where. And I love the way he does it, where Shepard walks back in the room, and Frank just kind of like, "Hi, guy." And he knocks out Shepard, and then he returns the favor, and he gets Shepard's wallet, and he sees his address, and then he escapes and goes to Shepard's apartment, and then he finds all the trophies from the murders.
For sure.
And while he's finding the trophies, Shepard comes back. He can't quite tell if he suspects that Frank is there, or if he's just kind of like, I hear a mysterious sound. But then we have the kind of a what you think is the climactic fight sequence where Shepard and Frank have it out, and initially Shepard is chasing Frank, and then they have the fight at the pier, and Frank pops up, Shepard vanishes, but now Satch and his partner have seen the trophies because they were chasing, because they followed Shepard And so now we know that Frank's innocent and, Shepard's the bad guy. Movie over, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. So Frank goes home. He repairs the radio. You have that nice sequence where we're seeing all these things materialize in real time. Again, we'll set the logic aside for a moment. Mm-hmm. And then he fills John in.
He also throws away the cigarettes.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Yes, he does. He tells John about the fight, but then John has a really good question. If Shepard's been identified as the Nightingale Killer, and Shepard apparently died in the river, why is Julia still dead? Mm-hmm. Boom, Shepard shows up. 1969, 1999. And it's an interesting sequence. Uh-huh. This is where I get my final really peppy about the movie. We'll get to that in just a moment. So in 69, Shepard handcuffs Frank, and then he attacks Julia. In 1999, Shepard and Frank are fighting. And I do like the way that they do the sequence, but okay.
So you mean in parallel?
Yeah, the parallel sequences.
Okay.
Same guy fighting father and son.
This is what I'm talking about with the dramatic tension, because in any other time travel movie, you would know what happened beforehand, and the deal is to go back and fix it or whatever. Mm-hmm.
But it hasn't
this one, it's happening simultaneously, and so the drama on both sides is maintained.
But again, there's a paradox thing that we'll get to just a minute. But more importantly, we see the effect of that very nicely when Shepard's attacking Julia and Julia scratches his face, and then in 1999 the scars just appear, just like zoop, they're there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like we're seeing how Shepard is being affected by the fight in 1999, or the effects of the fight from 1969 in Shepard 1999. Mm-hmm. And then we get to the sequence where
I didn't realize that until I might have forgotten that they were both fighting the same guy at exactly the same time.
And the radio thing, which is a little overdone because it's kind of like at one point distracts Shepard in 69, then distracts Shepard 99, or vice versa. I can't remember the exact sequence. But it climaxes with Shepard has Johnny. Yep. In 69, and he is threatening to kill Johnny if Frank doesn't drop the shotgun that we haven't seen since the chest.
Indeed.
Check out shotgun.
Indeed.
And then Julia attacks him. Johnny lets go. Shepard charges the Frank, and Frank blows his hand off.
Yes.
Okay. And then we get to 1999. And then we have to watch the sequence where Shepard's hand in 1999 is withering away.
That one is much different than everything else.
Yes!
I do have a gripe about that.
I think they just wanted it to look cool.
Yeah, and they probably didn't. They might not have the. They probably wanted the rating because seeing his hand blow up and then disappear might have been too graphic.
No, we see that.
Yeah, that's right.
We do see that. We see his hand blow off. But then instead of just saying all of a sudden, it's like, Shepard's hand not being there, he's sitting here staring as it's somehow timey-wimey going away.
That was a little awkward.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I don't mind if you're going to do one way or the other, but pick a lane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that was a
And of course, as this is happening, the room is changing around him, and who do we see? We now see a Frank in his 60s who has, by throwing away the cigarettes, now survived cancer, but that change only now takes place, and he uses presumably the same shotgun, killing Frank. Yeah. So,
but okay, let me put this in a positive light of ignoring the timey-wimey stuff.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
That line at the end is just killer of I'm still here, Chief.
For sure. I'm
so
still
cool.
here, Chief. That was a good
It makes no sense, though.
So...
I had that in my notes. Because it's a sweet line until the moment you start thinking about it. He was there all along.
Not necessarily, per se.
He knew when to say it. He's like, he was definitely play acting this a little bit of he's like, okay, when I find my son fighting this guy, I'm going to come in, blow him up I forget how that happens in the present, but he comes in, I'm going to say the line.
I'm going to shoot him and say the line.
Shoot him and say the line.
He knew it was coming.
Do you know what would have made that work for me?
Go on. Yeah.
is if Frank in 1969 heard that line and that was like the last thing that they heard on The Connection.
I mean, they probably didn't
That would be
film
cool.
it, but they could have. That would have been fantastic.
It would have been fantastic because then it would have been like then he's aware he's going to be
now
there.
he knows he's alive, so now he's
one
actually
thing that
not dead.
annoyed me that is a lot smaller than the whole time thing is just how they played it fast and loose of how close you have to be to the speaker when you got to push the button to
They stopped pushing the button a long time, but.
My understanding is that if you, I did a bit of research.
Yeah.
The discussion boards from 2000 are still around, and apparently they have issues with how ham radio represent, like the you're pressing the button and everything. So you think I've got issues? Ask a few ham radio people about how they represent ham radio in those things.
That's funny.
But then we get the epilogue where we have everyone's living their best lives now.
Yahoo license plate.
Yeah, Yahoo license plate on a Benz. Maybe he's not living his best life because he has one of his headlights broken. But fortunately, there's a few cops, so he can deal with that. But Julia's alive, Frank's alive. They're having and John is now married, and she's pregnant, and
he also has a
son.
Has a son.
In the script, he's Frank Jr., but they don't say it.
And that's Frequency.
Yeah, a good one.
Maybe we should have called the movie Headache for my sake. But
Cool. So that's our review of Frequency. Now our review of Interstellar.
Yes. So this opens with a look into the life of Joseph Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey, who is a former engineer and test pilot turned farmer. And that's because it's 2067 and civilization is collapsing due to a blight that has made humanity dependent upon just two crops, corn and okra, and it turns out okra's days are numbered. Joseph Cooper has had to go from being this great test pilot and this brilliant engineer to being a farmer. Because as they pointed, that's what we need now. We need farmers. This is now a caretaker generation, and I love how they talk about this notion of generational change because we get it with his relationship with his father-in-law Donald, played by the brilliant John Lithgow.
For sure.
And Aaron, we're going to have to talk about the fact we're going to start finding John Lithgow movies where he's not playing this elderly grandfatherly figure because we did that too with Rise of the Planet of the Apes.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
they use footage from the Dust Bowl of like people talking about the Dust Bowl. I guess it's like
it's a documentary that
PBS something.
Ken Burns' documentary.
Yeah, Ken Burns. That's what I was thinking. Anyway, but there's one person in there that is not from that documentary, which is older Murph.
Maybe they should have thrown a little bit more grain on there to make it look a little bit more like the other ones.
Which is interesting in and of itself because it sets you up. I didn't realize this till now of this is what old Murph looks like. And so you've got that emotional and setup connection of when you see her later, you know who this is.
It's her!
It's her!
It's the lady!
Yeah. But
it took me a few times watching it before I realized that lady at the beginning was actually Murph.
Yeah.
And there's a line from one of them where they're like, we put our bowls upside down so they wouldn't get dust in them. And my brother Josh was joking, and he's like, we always put our laptops upside down in the barn.
Well, one of the things I like about that is it does point to the plausibility. I mean, they're not having to make up some sort of thing. This is some sort of thing that people have experienced before. And also it shows how people persevere.
For sure.
Yeah, and the word that I wrote down was verisimilitude.
Yeah.
Yes.
It makes it feel real.
Yeah.
So.
And the sense as to how and in this to me there's I mean, we're so surrounded by now with dystopias and apocalypses in fiction,
for sure.
And so much of it's kind of like this thing happens, and all of a sudden I'm going to make a Furiosa reference. This thing happens, and all of a sudden we're wearing animal skins and throwing razor boomerangs at one another and whatnot. And that's not how I think it would work. And I think that what the Nolans do here is they get to how it would work, which is that, okay, the federal government no longer exists. I mean, what's replaced it, we don't know. We don't need to know. There is some sort of government, though. But now we've had to make these changes and adjustments. So we're not. It's not so much we go from 60 to 0. It's just more we're in this slow decline, and there's this possibility we can pick up. And until then, we just have to keep keep calm and carry on.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's basically what his children are being prepared for. Tom and Murphy or Murph, and this is where we get to see an even younger Timothy Chalamet.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, I guess, Paul Atreides will save us. And then we have Mackenzie Foy, who I had to say, I'm looking at her, I'm thinking, okay, is Anne Hathaway playing the older her? Because she looks,
really does look like Anne Hathaway.
Yeah. Yeah, but the hair is different color, but I mean, the face is so much more like Anne Hathaway there.
You're talking about older Murph? Or?
Young Murph looks like Anne Hathaway.
Oh,
Anne
okay.
Hathaway.
Yeah. Abigail's character.
Yeah,
okay.
Abigail Brand. Yeah. So,
Brand.
there and that's where you have that great teacher conference where you have the idea that they're all being trained for farmers now, and while Cooper has accepted that, he chafes at it.
For sure.
He wants more, and you have that great conversation between him and Donald, where Donald's of that. He's of that millennial generation where all these great things were happening, and Cooper's of the generation where they were realizing that they, that was coming to an end, and so it's like he's tasted the great things. But before he could contribute, he's, things change.
Yeah, I love that they make the grandpa. I guess since this was made in 2014, a millennial, but if they wrote it today, it would be a Gen Zer.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So
Cooper was born in 2034.
Yes. and they still in 2050 still needed test pilots.
Yeah,
because that's what we see at the very beginning.
Indeed.
Is that he's testing a craft and there's a gravitational anomaly and everything.
Yeah.
Although you don't realize the details of that till later on.
Indeed.
So
it's interesting because the person that's talking to him, it's a voice that comes up later in the movie.
Oh.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So, and you get another sense of the civilizational collapse when they go to a baseball game. And it looks like it's like a minor league game. It looks actually kind of like the game that you see at the end of Frequency.
Yeah.
But it's the New York Yankees.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's
I didn't even pick up on that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
and that's where we get the grumbling about how, these guys can't play baseball. These people play baseball my day. And Donald's grumbling about the fact they don't have hot dogs games anymore. And then we see why they don't have hot dogs games anymore, because here comes this ginormous dust cloud.
It's really interesting, the baseball game. It could be considered a metaphor for a lot of different things. That's actually a crisscross. Baseball being a metaphor.
Oh.
But you see,
yeah.
These baseball fans, and these baseball players, they're all not very good at baseball because the people that are competent are farmers. So the people that couldn't farm, throw them into baseball. And things like that. They're living in a society where anybody that has capability, they force them to be a farmer instead of being a scientist, being an engineer, being anything else. And there's so few people to choose from that not really anybody is good at anything except for maybe some farmers.
And that's the other thing that gives you a sense that something really bad has happened, because when you had that throwaway line that Donald makes about how you have this, when you talk about, you better, the teacher, she's pretty, yet to repopulate.
Yeah.
So when we had 6 billion people, that wasn't enough. What happened to, why do we now need to repopulate? What happened? And it doesn't need to be said.
Yeah,
It's
it
the gist of it. You don't have to do this elaborate backstory.
Yeah.
We just know something terrible's happened.
The apocalypse isn't the main focus of the story.
Exactly.
It's what it causes.
Yeah,
what
it's
it makes
about
people
recovering
do.
from the apocalypse.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but there's this dust storm that rolls in, so everyone has to go home. And I like how it's not this panicked, avoid the cloud, avoid the cloud. It's just,
Right.
we're going to drive through the storm, get home, and they're trying to secure the home. And Murph realizes that she's left the window to her room open. So she goes up there, and that's when you see the dust. Mm-hmm. And this place is something that she mentions at the beginning about how she thinks she has a poltergeist of some sort.
Yeah.
Books falling off the shelf.
Yeah. And Cooper, who's a very he's a very scientifically trained person. He thinks very scientifically. He's kind of like he kind of walks through the process, how you need to process it. But he goes up there and he sees that something is happening in the dust, and there's a pattern.
Yes, there is a pattern. Exactly.
And Cooper figures out the pattern. He figures out that it's binary. He figures out that it's coordinates. He identifies where it is on a map, and then he goes to figure out what it is. And Murph stows away in the truck, and they get to the secret base. NORAD, exactly. The old NORAD. And this is one of the interesting things is that they make it clear a couple times that there's no longer even militaries. Mm-hmm. That's how bad things have gotten. Is that not only
the first thing your government has?
Yeah,
military.
but now and apparently there's no longer a need for militaries, which is really interesting because you think that there would be militaries because people would be fighting with each other over resources. That's where we're getting a very optimistic depiction, but at the same time, it's also like, is it really so bad to where we can't even fight over the resources anymore?
We don't even have a surplus of people that aren't farmers.
Exactly.
They're just in survival mode. Yeah. And, this is a great place to introduce the theme of this movie the thematic playground of this movie is survival.
Survival, for sure.
So,
and it's when you see in so many different iterations. You see it on the large scale of humanity. You see it on the individual scale. You see it on the small group scale. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
We find out though that it's no longer NORAD. It is now where we have secret NASA, which is
I love secret NASA.
Everyone loves secret NASA.
But it turns out that NASA, after it was shut down, it was covertly restarted. And the facility is being run by John Brand, played by the Nolan stalwart Michael Caine.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, let me jump back just a little bit.
Yes, please.
Right before they leave to go to Secret NASA, that they don't know is Secret NASA yet. She says, "But you don't know what you're going to find." He's like, "And that's why I can't take you."
Yeah.
So good dad stuff right there.
For sure.
There's also the sense though that about the competing impulses that he has of being a father and being an explorer.
Yeah,
for sure.
And that's a tension that you see in the movie.
That's probably the driving tension of the story.
Exactly.
And then when they're driving, or when he's driving off, he's keeping stuff under a blanket, and he lifts up the blanket, and she's underneath it.
Yeah.
And so that'll be a setup for later on.
And he doesn't send her back. He lets her come with her because of his fostering of her scientific knowledge.
Yes.
I mean, we get the impression Tom he's a good farmer. He could be college bound, but circumstances don't warrant. Murph, though, is her father's daughter. She is gifted. She has his books. And you get the impression they're not up for decoration. She's actually been reading them.
Sure, yeah.
And I think I think he respects that commitment of hers.
Indeed. A funny little note about her in the car is when they get to NORAD, he says, "This is the end of the line." She looks at the fence and she says, "Didn't you bring your bolt cutters?"
Yeah, that's great.
And of course, when he is confronted with TARS, he says, "I've got my daughter," and then I think he gets tasered.
Yep, tased by TARS.
Yeah. I love the interrogation sequence where you have this gigantic robot, who's
just big
Marine,
brick,
and he refuses to be intimidated.
Yeah,
and it's really interesting because the voice for TARS is the same voice that was directing him while he was flying in the Ranger in its test flight.
Oh, okay.
So it was most likely a robot ex-Marine that was there with him, misunderstanding, causing all of the emotional trauma.
Oh yeah, he references that later. He's like, the last time I trusted one of you guys, I ended up crashing.
Oh,
so.
I missed that. Huh,
but yeah,
interesting.
So TARS is, it could have been TARS, but it doesn't have to be. Just a robot that he doesn't trust, possibly because of that interaction. Yeah.
And it's the notion that while he is comfortable with technology, he definitely has to be seen controlling it, and you get that from the early sequence with the drone plane.
For sure, yeah.
Where he guides it and controls it, and
all of the robot tractors.
Yeah.
All of them being distracted by the gravitational anomaly and going towards it.
Going back to Secret NASA.
Yeah, Secret NASA.
So
and Michael Caine.
Yes. So Brand tells Cooper that it's only that we're basically down to now. It's just corn, and that it's only going to be a matter of time before the blight kills off the corn, so that humanity's doomed, and NASA is tasked with doing something about this. And the way they're going to do it is they're going to find a new home for humanity, and the key to it is a wormhole that has popped up around Saturn, and instantly they're like, this isn't a coincidence. Wormholes are not naturally occurring. This has been provided for us, and we're going to use it to find a potentially habitable world on the other side. This isn't connecting to the next star system. This is connecting to a whole.
They keep referring to they made it, and they don't know who they. He's like, who's they?
Yes.
But they assume the assumption by the scientists is that this is a good thing, and that they've already sent astronauts through over. They sent a dozen, and then that NASA has is pretty much has finished building an interplanetary spaceship, the Endurance, which they intend to send through the wormhole, find out what the astronauts who've already been sent through, try to recover as many of them, and determine which world of the dozen is the most promising.
Yeah,
and then there's like two plans. Plan A is that if humanity has, quote, harnessed gravity, they will then, go through and all of humanity will go through. But if they haven't harnessed gravity, and that's Brand's job to do, they are going to establish a permanent colony using a gene bank of fertilized eggs.
Yeah, which they call a population bomb.
Yes.
So.
Brand then asks Cooper, will you pilot the ship? And Cooper's having this most relatable dilemma I can imagine, which is that he is torn between his, love of, as a parent of his children, not wanting to leave them, and this once in a lifetime opportunity, maybe the last in a lifetime opportunity to do this. And of course, Brand knows exactly which button to push, which is, do it for the children.
Yep.
He and Murph go back. Murph he's made his choice. Murph is miserable, and she feels like so many, just practically every kid her age would, that not what he's doing is for her. She's only aware that he is leaving her.
Yeah.
And he doesn't seem to tell her that he's saving the world, which he touches on later, that he never told her about that.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting decision personally, but I can understand his own fears.
Well, I think the idea was to tell her that was necessary. They would have had to have mentioned that the corn is going to go.
Yeah, in essence. Yeah.
And that when that goes, then I guess
that they're going to die.
They'll be stuck with eating Soylent Green.
Yeah, for sure. If I was in the situation, I would certainly
Oh,
say...
now I think about it. Okay, that's why the population's an issue. There isn't enough people to eat anymore.
Yeah, it's true.
No.
No more Soylent Green.
So let me just cover in detail this scene, the stay scene.
Yes.
This is the pivotal scene of the movie. And you'll find that every single big beat of this movie is a Murph Cooper scene. Sure. So this is the end of Act 1. She has figured out the code on the bookshelf, and it says stay. And she was trying to convince him to stay. And
we as the audience aren't sure if she's telling the truth.
Yeah.
Because she just wants him to stay. She could just lie about it.
And then... So he says, this is something his wife said, once you're a parent, you're the ghost of your children. And he's like, I can't be your ghost now. And that's a very clear foreshadowing of that I guess you wouldn't pick up until further viewings that he is the ghost. And then they pull out the watches, which is great. Like there's so many setups going on here. They pull out the watches and he's like, I love you forever and I'm coming back.
There's a really interesting dynamic here that I must confess, I haven't really thought through. But it's that Cooper is leaving Murph behind.
Yeah.
And John Brand is sending his daughter into space.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's Anne Hathaway's character, Amelia Brand. And it's this idea of how, whereas, Cooper's making the choice to, do this for his daughter. Brand is, on the surface, sending his daughter into this unknown situation.
Yeah.
Although we'll find out later on that he's kind of making a similar choice as a dad to do this for his daughter so that his daughter may live. It's just that
I never even thought about that.
Perspective on that. But it's just, I just thought it was fascinating how the father-daughter dynamic here is not just between Cooper and Murph. It's between also John and Abigail Brand. But it's one that is doesn't receive quite the same degree of exploration.
For sure. I mean, they're not the main focus.
Exactly.
Well, I'll get to talking about their relationship a little bit as we go along, but this will be good.
Yeah,
But
very nice.
but let's start.
Definitely.
We have Cooper driving away, and we have that nice callback to that earlier sequence where he checks under the tarp just to make sure she's not there.
And she just barely misses him.
It's just a cooler, and it just hits you. This is the power of a good setup and a payoff.
But now he's going to space, and he's going to space as one member of this crew. We have Cooper, we have Amelia.
Indeed.
We have two other humans. We have Doyle, played by Wes Bentley, and we have, is it Romilly?
Yes, Romilly.
Romilly, played by David Gyasi. And then we have two robots, Tarzan and Case. And I have to say that the way that they represent these robots in the movie is just so wonderful.
I like it,
Yeah.
And the banter and everything. And it's a nice, it lightens the mood so nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet it's not like it's not like the old.
It's not like Jar Jar Binks or anything
or
like
Twinkie. The idea, I mean, there's robots so often in science fiction are comic relief, and it's used here. But the robots then become ridiculous, and you don't have that here. Yeah. It's like they're comic relief, but they're in a way that is both plausible in the sense that maybe it's part of the protocol to in terms of helping with stress and everything, but also they're very functional, and they do such a nice job of showing their utility throughout the movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they've got these great minimalist designs of they're just bricks, but then they have these sections that come out, and then there's sections in sections that they have tools that they can pull out.
We're not talking about anthropomorphic androids. We're talking
it's
about
very they made them intentionally very non-human.
Yes.
Very utilitarian.
Yeah.
And I think they probably pulled they are possibly referencing 2001: A Space Odyssey. The obelisk that looks exactly
monolith.
like that. The monolith.
They do that in a couple of places. Yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking as I was watching. I said this is very much Nolan's 2001.
Yeah, I can see
maybe
that.
2001 with a heart.
I really made that connection when they get to the wormhole, because there is very much of a when Bowman travels through the monolith 2001, you get that trippy sequence. You get a very similar sequence when they're going through the wormhole. And it takes them 2 years together. And that's the idea, is that Cooper's going to that's what Cooper's expecting. They're going to go there for 2 years, take 2 years to get to the wormhole, go through the wormhole, maybe download some voicemails, identify a planet back. So we're talking he's going to miss the teenage years, which
maybe like 5 years total. That'd
exactly, 5 years tops. He can come back. He can see her off to prom, and he's saved humanity in the process. So they get on the other side of the wormhole, though.
Okay, before we get into the wormhole, though, there's just the way that they handle space. It's completely silent in space, even when they.
Which is nice.
Even when they have like explosions and different things, if they show it outside, it's silent. If it's inside the space station, like will happen later on, and there's an explosion, you can hear it.
And I think that does two things. One, of course, it's scientific, but two, it gives you the contrast.
Yeah, and even the cinematography, all the cameras outside are mounted cameras, as like you would have on a space station.
Sure.
And then,
just real quick, I just want to build on that briefly.
Go on.
That, again, is another way in which you can, I think of this as being Nolan's 2001, because until 2001, it was so much about sound and space. We're going to have explosions and laser shots. And, of course, afterward, like Star Wars, you have that. And that was one of the things that Kubrick really insisted upon, was that notion of we're going to have, space is silent. We're going to do that. And I think it's the thing that too many science fiction filmmakers do, which is that they need to emphasize the action and the excitement, and you need sound for that.
Yeah.
And even in a work that I really have just so much love for, which is Battlestar Galactica, the revived series, they do the they do the soundlessness thing, but at the same time they don't. So they do one, they use music, and they use music so effectively, but they also you'll hear, instead of like the pew 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 or like of the old Battlestar Galactica series, it'll be more like the kind of like the thing. So it's like it's a bit of a cheat, but it's one you kind of tolerate. But here, Nolan's very much about, we're going to do this. This is serious science, and I think, again, this is what you're going to get when you have a physicist over your shoulder saying that's not how it works.
Yeah, for sure.
And aside from the reality of it, it just emotionally has this effect of, there's this scene where they're passing past Saturn, and Romilly, is that? Yeah, Romilly.
Yeah.
He is freaking out about being on a spaceship, and Cooper hands his headphones to him, and it's just rain noises, and like, there's something about just the flying across Saturn shot with just Earth noises on top of it that's really serene.
One quick note about Saturn.
Yeah.
That was the original destination in 2001.
Oh, okay.
They chose it to Jupiter because at the time they could not do a good representation of the rings.
I see.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. So what you're seeing here is what you can do with about a half century of movie technology, and you can make those rings just really, pop.
Yeah, for sure.
And then last note before we go into the wormhole, there's the poem that
The message.
Brand
The
that
poem,
keeps saying
Yates.
to and she says, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light."
No, that's not Yates. That's not. Is it not? Oh gosh, not
Bad with names. It's a well-known one.
Dylan Thomas.
Yeah,
But
Dylan Thomas.
it plays into the theme of survival, and I really love that poem on like a spiritual level. The first time I watched that movie, because it's like, I don't know, kind of a moral thing of like, when things are going really bad, like rage against the dying of the light. But then you'll see this will take a really dark tone to this poem later on. But
You want the best reading ever of that poem?
Oh.
yeah.
Rodney Dangerfield, Back to School.
That's
There's this great sequence at the end. It's if you've never seen it, it's arguably Rodney Dangerfield's best movie, and he does this reading of it to Sally Kellerman. That's just really funny, and how he summarizes the poem is just hilarious. But it's like whenever I hear that movie, it's probably why the poem has a little bit less of an impact for me, because I hear it and I just instantly think of, oh, that's what Rodney Dangerfield read that one.
Yeah.
So,
it's
funny.
a famous quote by Rodney Dangerfield.
So as we get to the wormhole, there's this scene is often maligned by people just because it's always the thing that they use when they're explaining a wormhole, of the folding a paper in half and poking it through it. But the way he describes it is like, Romilly's really emotional about it. In fact, Cooper's like, "Say it, don't spray it." Yeah. And he's like, "But I thought it would look like a hole." And he's like, "It's a 3-dimensional hole." Like so what you're seeing is like the other side of the wormhole, the 360 view on a negative globe, basically, is what you're seeing.
Time space is 3-dimensional, so a hole in time space is a sphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's
directly just a.
It's also a great way of, again, needling all the lousy science fiction depictions of
they do that.
Astronomy. So they go through the wormhole, and they arrive in a system that is circling this supermassive black hole.
After a handshake, of course.
Yeah. After the handshake, which is kind of a, maybe we've met the ones who've created this type of thing. We don't know. But this is where we see Gargantua. Indeed. And Gargantua is the great plot complicator.
Yeah.
Because we're not just talking about another solar system. We're talking about a black hole where we have to deal with the challenges that it poses, where this is where you get to, learning about the relationship between time and gravity, and how of the 3 possible candidates, the first one, which they call Miller's planet, is orbiting deep within the black hole's gravity well,
Mm-hmm.
where 1 hour is equal to 7 Earth years.
Yep.
So there is this thing about how they're now faced with, and this is one of the things I like about it, is they're faced with this series of problems. They have to solve them.
Mm-hmm.
And the first problem is that they're talking about a trade-off between time and fuel.
Yeah.
And Cooper, who's very much focused upon time, is thinking that we're going to go ahead, we're going to do it in a way that is actually going to save us time.
Mm-hmm.
We're going, it's like, it sounds so simple. We're going to pop down, we're going to find Miller, we're going to get her data, we're going to pop back up, we're going to lose maybe like 2 Earth years. Okay.
I know, right?
Yeah. And so they, it's Doyle, it's Amelia, it's Cooper, and it's Case.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how they give the robots slightly different personalities.
Yep.
And it's one of my favorite lines is when Cooper's getting on board the craft, and he mentions to Case how Case doesn't talk so much, and Case is like, well, Tars talks enough for both of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is such a wonderful line coming from a robot in this.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that they had Romilly stay behind, because he's the one that hates space.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's true.
Yes.
And I think it's also interesting that they have this percentage humor amounts for the alien, or the aliens, sorry, the robots.
Humor and honesty.
Yeah, honesty.
Yeah, honesty and humor.
Yeah.
Those are the two ones. That
And it gets to one of the things I love about the usage of that, which is that they use it, but they don't overuse it.
yeah, for sure.
And it's also a setup for the relationship between Brand and Cooper.
90% honesty.
90% honesty
They
setting.
say that a few times.
Yeah.
They get to Miller's planet, they land safely, and they figure out inside of like 5 minutes that this planet is uninhabitable. And I have to say that it's just so wonderfully done. They've been getting these signals from Miller. They figure the planet must be good. They arrive and they realize that the planet is not habitable. They can figure this out right away, but Miller never communicated that because of the time distortion.
Mm-hmm.
That what has been years for them has been hours for her.
Yeah.
And in that time, she has died because this planet has these enormous waves that constantly sweep the surface. Mm-hmm. And I love how initially you landing, and you're like, okay, that's off in the distance, that's a mountain. And it's like you see it off in the distance, and Cooper's one is like, that's not a mountain, that's a wave. And then you're like, wow, it's a big wave. He's like, oh, that's receding. You turn around, and there's the big one coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's this great sequence where they're trying to recover the information from Miller's recorders, but they got to get back to the ship. Tars rescues Brand. I love that. That's really where you see the robot, in you operate in full operation. Doyle is like, he's last to get on. He doesn't get on. We see Doyle's body right before they leave. But because the craft was flooded by the big wave while Cooper and Abigail Brand survive, it takes an hour to dry out the engine, and in that time they have lost over 2 decades.
Yeah.
Indeed. It's interesting because 3 forms of time dilation are actually happening on the planet with them. The first one is due to the gravity of Gargantua, which they discuss directly. It's in that gravity well, so time and space is being warped, whole 7 years, so on and so forth. The second one is actually special relativity, because Gargantua is so big that something that is going in orbit around it at that distance is actually going half the speed of light.
Oh, man.
Wow.
It's just so big that it has that much gravitational energy. So they have that sort of time dilation. And the third sort of time dilation, perhaps the strongest, most powerful, is movie time dilation. They say, it's going to take an hour for them to dry. Literally like 2 lines of dialogue and it's dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
That's Christopher Nolan's favorite type of time dilation.
Yeah, indeed.
Uses it in Inception, Tenet is based off of that.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
But ultimately, I mean, any movie is describing a story, and the
Yes.
most efficient way to do that. So, in the reality that it's trying to describe, they probably talked for a much longer period where there was lots of awkward silences.
Yes, there
but
were.
these are the takeaways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Cooper and Brand go back to Endurance,
Yeah.
and they find a much older Romilly, who and I like how they don't have him with like a long gray beard, going hey. So, but he's, and in parts because he's been spending time in suspended animation, but he's his hairlines are receded, and he seems much sadder, maybe a little off, perhaps, because he's only had Tars to keep him company. Yeah, I forgot. Case when he went down, so it was Case that saves
That's right.
Amelia. So, and then you get that incredibly emotionally painful sequence of Cooper catching up on the past, nearly quarter century of his family's life through these videos.
Yeah.
Which come from Tom, and he has one video from Murph.
At the very end.
Yeah. And this is where we learn about, the fact that Murph has now grown up and become John Brand's, number 2 assistant, right-hand person, collaborator in terms of trying to crack these gravity equations, which is not going well. And they're plugging away at it, but things...
But, okay, before we move on from this is a very good place for me to cover something. Okay, so this is the midpoint. Him watching his daughter now grown. That is, first of all, the thing that holds this relationship is what holds this movie together. That's the emotional through line for the movie. And it's also representing the theme. Individual love versus collective love. Individual love represented by Murph and Cooper. Collective love represented by the population bomb and Plan B. Basically, the philosophy that we'll come to learn is Dr. Brand's, the elder Dr. Brand's philosophy.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, though, how that plays out in another respect, which is the conversation they have on the Endurance after they've survived Miller's World, which is that where there's a question of which planet do they go to next. Because of the time lost, they can basically visit one planet of the 2 remaining candidates and then return to Earth. And
it's largely because of the fuel loss.
Yes.
From lots of things happening, but a big part of it was Romilly was using up fuel for 23 years on the Endurance because he didn't know they were going to come back, so he wasn't conserving anything.
Yeah.
That's one of the things.
And, of course, the fact that the gamble that Cooper was proposing, didn't just fail, it backfired.
Yeah,
they ended up losing
absolutely.
both time and fuel.
For sure.
And so now it's a situation where do they go to Man's World or do they go to Edmund's World? And Brand is making the case, Abigail Brand's making the case that we need to go to Edmund's World. And it's at this point that Cooper says, that's because you're in love with Edmonds. And so it's this idea that she's not making the choice based upon group love. She's making it upon individual love. And I like her response, which is that the 2 aren't mutually exclusive. But there is this sense that once it's put out there, you can't lose, which is that, do you really know that for certain maybe she is making this choice out of individual love only, and that she's choosing to go to find Edmonds, not that necessarily that Edmonds' World is the more viable, especially since they've gotten some good data from Man's World. And so that maybe, and that's where they get the decision. Again, it seems to be really Cooper's decision that they're going to go to Man's World.
Since he was the leader of the 12.
Exactly. He was the smartest person. He made this all happen, and so they're going to trust him. While we're seeing this play out, while this is playing out, back on Earth, Brand is dying. John Brand is dying.
Yes.
And he gives this deathbed confession to Murph that the gravity equations, they're never going to have enough data to successfully solve them. That Plan B was really the only plan all along, And that plan A was a placebo to give people hope so that they wouldn't, drive around in cars in the Australian desert and try to kill each other for water and oil and whatnot. So, so and this just wrecks Myrrh because not only is she hearing that all this her lifetime project has been basically pointless, but also the thought that maybe her father knew and he abandoned her to die.
Yeah, for sure.
And she channels all this into this message that she sends to the Endurance, where she says to them, that John Brand is dead, and she basically accuses them of knowing this. And I love how this message is received as you're seeing the landing craft leaving Endurance and landing on Man's World.
For sure.
So you don't know. It's kind of like
suspense.
Oh, it's a great suspense because you don't know when that particular time bomb is going to go off.
Yeah.
But
let me jump back just a little bit.
Yeah.
So comparing Cooper watching Murph's message to Brand watching her father's message to her, there's just a coldness to that one of he's just saying that poem of don't go
gentle into that good night.
Don't go gentle into that good night. And he that's kind of where Brand is coming from of he's just about the human species and about making it live on, and he's kind of forgotten the individual of his own daughter. He's just sermonizing to her, and she's getting nothing out of this. She's just like sitting with her knees up on there, staring at him, trying to get something out of this. And then like Coop and Murph, you just feel it of he's just, I mean, you can see it in his face. And that,
I mean, that I think is the best performance of the movie is him sitting there,
for sure,
feeling the emotions, watching. I mean, the arc that he goes through with Tom, where Tom tells him that he's met someone, they get married, he has a grandson, the grandson dies.
Sure.
yeah.
And that you get the impression he's sad about that.
You just feel life passing by with his son.
But it's fascinating how he seems to get more emotional about the one message from Murph than he does about all the messages from Tom.
He tends to not focus on the relationship that was going well. You focus on the one that had a problem.
Yeah. So we see the craft going to Man's World, and there's this great sequence that I don't know if it holds up scientifically, but it's so well done, where you see them, they're like flying under the cloud, turns out the cloud is frozen.
And it goes,
yes.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think of is if the cloud is sort of like a balloon, where it's holding in very light gases, and that's what's lifting it up, and it's a very light outer shell of crystal.
Yeah,
sort of
I really like that idea, but just thinking about it, it's like, okay, didn't they have to fly through clouds to get there, and wouldn't they be colder higher up in the atmosphere?
But it gets the impression it's just how unpromising this seems.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it's good foreshadowing in a way. But we're trusting that there's so much faith in man.
For sure.
And so they land, they find the kind of the survival capsule, they revive him, and who man is played by Matt Damon. So there's probably it's amazing how many cameos and unannounced appearances he shows up. Like you have Euro Trip, you have Saving Private Ryan. This seems to be a thing he likes to do, which is be the uncredited surprise in every film. But he tells them that I know it doesn't look promising, but if you drill deep enough, there is a habitable surface beneath the frozen clouds. And that this is where they're going to set up Earth 2. As he's explaining this to them, they get the relay message from Murph about John Brand's death. And it seems that Abigail was left unawares. And again, this is where you get to this interesting relationship. Cooper would never hide this sort of thing from Murph. But you get that coldness where John... it basically becomes pretty clear that he's manipulated his own daughter.
Yeah.
I mean, he does it out of love in the sense that him, he wasn't just sending off the Plan B population, survival of humanity. He was making sure that his daughter was among the very small handful of humans that were going to survive.
Yeah.
So there is love there. It's just love that's expressed through actions rather than emotions and words.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I missed a line back there, but she says earlier, you might have to choose between your children and the future of the human race. That's the theme right there, boiled into a
and we
line.
see that theme coming up again, where once he gets that message, he decides to choose his children.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's an understandable choice from the standpoint of dad, because it's not. I mean, it's the very thought that his daughter believes she's been betrayed.
Yeah.
He's not worried about Tom, really. And Tom seems to be, for lack of a better word, content with his increasingly miserable existence. But the fact that Murph feels that way, and Jessica Chastain, who plays the adult Murph, she does such a great job of selling it on that message. Because I mean, she's not only acting, she's having to act it in a way through the screen. It's kind of like you're not a secondhand thing.
Yeah.
But he decides he's going back, and so Amelia's staying behind, Romilly's staying behind, Man's staying behind, but he's going back, and he's just going to set them up, and he's going to go. So he's helping the expedition settle. Meanwhile, we're seeing on Earth that Murph has decided she's going to ignore what John Brand has said. She's going to figure out the gravity situation. She's convinced that the solution lies at her family home. Tom's there. They're still growing corn, but we're also seeing the fact that now he's having to burn a portion of the crop because of the blight.
Yep. Which has now spread to corn.
Which is now spread to corn.
Wasn't doing corn before.
Just as John Brand had anticipated. And we're also finding out that Tom's wife and his surviving son, Coop, are also dying. They're having the respiratory illnesses. So that becomes a point of tension between them, where there's a sense of how Tom, in a sense, is so committed to being a farmer that he's unwilling to, not only is he not going to leave farming, he's condemning his wife and son to a fate that he knows what it's going to be like, because he already lost a son to this presumably to the same respiratory illness, something being caused by the dust. We don't exactly know what it is. So there's this sense of how time is running out.
Yeah. Which, in screenwriting terms, this is called the ticking clock, which we're getting towards Act 3, so this is exactly where it needs to be.
So, right before Cooper leaves, he and Man go on a scouting expedition. And we get this monologuing from Man, which initially I think you treat it as, well, Man's been pretty lonely. He's probably, he probably has a lot to say. But it turns out that there is something more going on. And I have to say, Matt Damon does such a great job in this role. He is very much, you can both see it coming and you can't. Which is, it turns out that Man, who had undergone all this training, who had this program, and who had left Earth because of the group love, has discovered through his travails that he has an individual love that is greater. He wants to live, and it turns out that Man's world is not habitable.
Very selfish love for himself.
Yes. This is the most selfish love, and that comes up at a little bit later on in the movie. But he has faked the data, so as to be saved because he wants to live. And he is willing to, at the very least, risk humanity, if not doom humanity, so that he may survive. Now, you could argue maybe he's gone a little insane from the loneliness and everything, but the point is that now that's his motivation, and
But he still maybe just gives lip surface to it, but he still is preaching the ideals of the collective love.
Yes.
He's like, every time we'll get to his last words.
Yes,
but-
that's exactly what I was referencing.
He is-
Yeah.
He feels very guilty.
Yeah.
But he's doing it anyway because he loves himself more.
He does such a great job of being both a villain at this point and yet being completely relatable.
For sure.
Because even though I'm sitting here watching this, I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, he's willing to sacrifice humanity to save himself. At the same time, it's kind of like, but you feel for the guy after what he's been through. So,
And he is feeling that guilt.
yes.
He knows that it's a horrible thing that he's doing. He's even thought about this for long nights. He's giving this rehearsed speech
Yes.
to Cooper as he has now smashed his helmet.
It's like he's as much screwing up his own courage to go after Cooper as anything else.
Just a quick note. The man's robot, his name is Kip. It's named for Kip Thorne, who's the
Scientific advisor.
the physicist that was the advisor on this
Well,
movie.
that's interesting.
So man attacks Cooper, and it's a very interesting fight because it is exactly the kind of fight that seems so plausible, which is that you don't have to have laser guns, you don't have to have, you simply have to crack the guy's helmet. And
I love the line where he's like, it's a 50-50 chance you break your helmet. And he's like, that's the best odds I've had in years.
Yep, for sure. So he breaks the helmet, he goes down, starts to asphyxiate, and man does this definitely rehearsed speech to him to try and make himself feel better.
Yes.
I'm gonna be here for you as you die. Are you seeing your kids right now? Okay, I can't handle it. I'm gonna go.
Yeah.
And this is the end of Act 2, by the way. And this is what I was talking about. Every single major plot point is a Murph plot point. Of the first one is the stay scene, and he leaves into Act 2. The midpoint is him seeing adult Murph in the video. The break into Act 3 is him seeing flashbacks of Murph and he describes this of, you're going to see flashes of your children before you die. It's about survival. This is about, it's kind of on the nose, Nolan-y type thing, but I mean, it set in the context of these are astronauts doing exactly that. Like, it's kind of get away with it, but yeah. Yeah. Just Murph is there at every big plot point.
But Cooper manages to contact Amelia, and so she and Tars she and Case go to save him. And when Romilly is trying to reactivate Kip, or like Romilly's beginning to realize that something funky is going on because the data doesn't correspond to what man said it would be, and so the robot, turns out is a bomb and blows up and kills Romilly. And as man is approaching, so it's kind of like now in his mind he's killed off 2 of the 3 people who've come to save him.
Yeah.
and now he's going to abandon the third.
Yeah.
And I love this chase sequence. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
Brand saves Cooper, and they go and they save Tars, or they recovered Tars, or Case, which at this point. But they're chasing after man, and it's a race to get to Endurance.
Yeah.
And of course, because man has head start, and this physics is a constant here, even if that constant changes in the circumstances, it's constant for both of them. Man gets to the ship first, and that's where and it's just clear he's acting on his desperation, his eagerness. He's kind of lost perspective, and so they're aware of something, and they're aware that he's not successfully docked. Man is aware of it. He just doesn't seem to care.
Yeah.
It's been a really long time since he's actually done astronaut things, and maybe he wasn't the one that docked. Maybe he doesn't actually know how difficult it is. Since they set up in the beginning how difficult docking is, a very tense scene, and especially without auto docking, which helps you be able to dock.
Yeah. And then this is where he gives his final lines, which I don't think he intended to be his final lines, but this was his one step for man speech. Oh man! But, anyway,
it's wonderful because it's like it's his full supervillain rationalization, which is that he is actually saving himself for the good of humanity.
Yeah, his last words are, "I'm gonna." This is something about all mankind, and boom, that shows you exactly what Nolan thinks of this, like the collective love. Okay, this is where I'm going to get into the underbelly of why I love this. Of collective love isn't actually love at all. You can't love people on a non-individual level because you don't know them. You can't love the entire human race because you don't know the entire human race. And so Coop's love is more real, and you can feel that in the movie, like in that midpoint scene, and all the different scenes with him and Murph.
And to build upon that, in effect, because he doesn't have that, it's kind of defaulted to himself. So he can't separate his self-love from the group collective love. So he has found a way to rationalize the fact that as long as he loves himself and prioritizes himself, he somehow is prioritizing abstract humanity, even though what he ends up doing jeopardizes the entire mission. Because when the lock fails and he dies, it damages endurance, and endurance starts spiraling into man's world. And so you had that great sequence where Cooper has to, astronaut the situation and figure out a way to make it all work. But it really is fascinating how, to me, it's the most predictable. Still fun to watch, but he's not going to fail.
Yeah,
that he's going to find a way to save. But it demonstrates the scope of the depths of man's selfishness, where not only does he kill off try to kill off the party, that his selfishness, because he is so lost, he almost dooms humanity.
For sure.
Yeah, and this redocking sequence is just so good. Like the tension of it and the building of it, and like you just see this thing spiraling and all the debris, and it's going into the atmosphere, and you're like, oh my goodness, they are not getting into that. Yeah. And then there's this great line that he's like, she's like, it's impossible or something, and he's like, no, it's necessary. Yes. And it's so cool.
That's great.
Yeah. And they succeed in doing the connection, but they find that the damage is such to where now they can't even necessarily get back to Earth. They can't even necessarily get back. They can't get to Edmund's planet unless they do this special maneuver, and it might also help them to finally crack the gravity situation, which is they're going to use gargantuous gravity. You could probably explain the science better than I could. But the idea, it's kind of like, to me, it was like kind of like a slingshot maneuver, but they're going to need to get 2 boosts from one of the Ranger vehicles and I think one of the landers.
Correct, yeah.
And so the idea is that TARS will be in one of them, the robot will sacrifice itself, and then Cooper will somehow use the other one successfully. What they don't tell Amelia, though, is that Cooper intends to sacrifice himself as well. That he's figured out that he can't do it, and in a way, it's an interesting sacrifice because in 2 levels, because you think about it, Cooper has made 2 boneheaded decisions. One was his idea of saving time for fuel with Miller's World, and then it was basically overriding Amelia about Man's World. And look how that turned out. Yeah. And each time they've lost a crew member. They lost Doyle and Miller's World. Again, that wasn't Cooper's fault, but it's probably something he feels guilty about. And then
an interesting thing about that is Doyle was probably the biggest one that wanted to go to Miller's planet. But Cooper went along with it, even though...
But he was the one that had the plan that because the gamble failed, that put him in the bad fuel situation in the first place. And now they're in a situation where Cooper's insistence on going to Man's World cost Romilly his life.
Indeed.
And has put them in a situation. And of course now he can't even get back to Murph.
Indeed.
He's just he is so he in effect has, and I don't think he sees it as group love. I think it is he sees as he's making up for what he did wrong for Murph, but he's going to sacrifice himself really for everyone.
Yeah, him and Murph is like the key individual love relationship of the movie.
And in effect, because he now has, just he's no longer in a situation where he's going to be able to see Murph ever again.
Mm-hmm.
What's the point of living? Now it's about, sacrificing for the greater good. And this budding love that is implied between him and Amelia.
Mm-hmm.
So he sacrifices himself for Amelia to give Amelia the opportunity to reach Edmund's world. Cooper then falls into the black hole.
Mm-hmm.
And he's dead. Movie over.
Yep.
We did it.
Yes. So.
Happy ending.
But wait, he's not dead.
What?
Oh.
I know. It turns out he is in some sort of construct.
Uh-huh.
He is in this construct that allows him to access the past. And this goes back to, this is a callback to a conversation that they have earlier where I think it was where Cooper, when he first realized the time he had lost on Miller's planet, and he was talking about how maybe they could somehow go back in time, and Amelia, being the very rational physicist, was like, "That's not how time works.
It only goes forward. You can never go back."
But now there's this, this space magic. At least that's basically.
Well, okay. Let me explain how this works because I know how this is. Okay, it's if you think of time as like a tissue box, it's like unfolding the tissue box. No, what am I saying? If a tissue box, which is a 3-dimensional object, is actually a 4-dimensional object, what this is doing is unfolding it so that you can look at time in all dimensions. So it physically, like what it's doing, and you can kind of see at the end of the scene when it's all folding back in on itself, it's kind of like, well, you've got the past and the present, and you've got all 3 dimensions, and so you've got this room that is represented in 3 dimensions and through time. Anyway, it's this cubic thing that you see repeated all over the place in this.
I can't help but feel you came up with this analogy when you were refilling.
It has nothing to do with that. I didn't tell this on the podcast, but when I was going to work the other day, my car ran out of gas on the side of the road, and I had to use a tissue box to funnel the gas into the gas tank.
So generally, the science that it's based around can be explained sort of like the wormhole. So you know how the wormhole is, you fold space and you put the hole through it and you can jump across. But you're not just folding space, you're folding space-time. So technically, if you can make a wormhole like these, they can. You can go to the past willy-nilly. Yeah. You just put a wormhole opening on that side, which is in the past, and have a new wormhole this side, which is the future to you.
And this is when Cooper realizes that they are not, space beings; they're human, future humans.
Or at least that's what he assumes. Yeah.
And this is where you get to what is referred to as the bootstrap paradox, which is where by now interfering in his own past, Cooper makes those things possible. He is the poltergeist that Murph experiences as a younger person. He is the one that is trying to tell himself to stay. He is the one that leaves the coordinates, and he realizes that he can, through this controlled gravity that he has in the Tesseract, he can manipulate the hands of Murph's watch to give her the data that she needs to solve the gravity manipulation problem. Because the hang up, and this is this point they make a couple times in the movie, is that to complete the data, they need to get data from inside a singularity, inside a black hole, which seemed to be a conundrum because nothing escapes from a black hole. But from where Cooper and Tars is, and I like the fact that Tars is there too, because this isn't Cooper just suddenly, crunching a bunch of numbers. He has a computer there to help him with it. They give...
he just looks with his special eyes and he's like,
exactly. So... he pulls out a whiteboard and starts writing the numbers down.
And he sees nothing because it's a black hole and you can't see anything.
And interestingly, the thing that they're trying to solve is the bridge between general relativity and quantum mechanics. So trying to bridge that, and if they do, they can create anti-gravity.
which it seems that Cooper's made possible. Then the Tesseract collapses, and it ejects Cooper into not Gargantua, but ejects Cooper into our solar system.
Indeed.
And
Back through the wormhole.
And he wakes up in a cylinder colony called Cooper Station, which is awfully flattering until he realizes it's a nice beat. He just assumes it's named for him.
Yeah.
No, it's named for his daughter.
The doctors just laugh at him when he says, "Oh, thanks for naming it after me."
Yeah, it's kind of like we know who you are, but you're not the most famous Cooper there is. No, it's his daughter who has become the savior of humanity. And I have to say, as a parent, as much as I like to be the hero, I would like even more if my kid's the hero.
For sure.
Okay.
So
I thought they chose me, but they chose her, he said.
Yeah. And so humanity's been saved thanks to the data that Cooper's passed along to Murph and Murph's ability to use it. He then reactivates TARS. He's living in the museum display of it.
Of his own house.
Yeah.
Well, it's the actual thing, but it's now it's a museum exhibit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not reconstruction?
No, they said it. They brought the whole thing.
Yeah.
back.
I vaguely recall that.
So and he actually, it was like this. It was much dustier, and then he recovers TARS, and that's where we had the final conversation about the humor levels. And
Yeah.
and which is so, because it's like how Cooper is kind of, TARS has become his
That's
friend.
right. There's a nickname that Cooper calls his son back on Earth, Turbo, and he starts calling TARS Turbo.
Oh, I hadn't even
Missed
noticed that.
Oh, so
And it's interesting because the thing, if we're to believe that this robot entity was the one who was there for him at the crash initially, where he crashed the Ranger, and he's had a grudge ever since that they weren't able to help him, that now he's gotten over that.
A bit of
that
an arc for
TARS,
him,
this
yeah.
AI creature, has helped him save his daughter, save the entire planet. So
it's
even closer.
But
now.
I think you see it even earlier on.
Yeah, I agree.
Like
It was
when
earlier
they're
on.
doing the connection, when they're trying to reconnect with Endurance, and he tells TARS that
That's
you have
right.
to take the stick if he passes out.
Indeed.
So, but we finally see, but Murph arrives. Cooper goes to see her, and she's now very elderly, played by the legendary Ellen Burstyn.
Yeah.
And she's surrounded by all these people, which I guess we presume are mostly her family,
Yeah.
entirely her
Her
family,
descendants,
your
most
descendants. And so she, in effect, forgives him for leaving her finally. Because it really, up until that time, there's been all the connections that have been bitterness. When he leaves her, the one message that he gets after he's been on Miller's World, the message he gets about John Brand's death, that was the last communication. Then you have the contact, where he's the poltergeist, and he gives him the information, but they've not had a face-to-face until then, and then she forgives him, and she encourages him to seek out Amelia, who has...
Well, before that, let me cover a line that is
sure.
my favorite line in there. Of she's like, they told me to give up, but I knew you'd come back. Sorry, I'm gonna tear up for this. This is great for Father's Day.
Because
he's
my
like,
daddy
because
promised.
he's like, how? And she's like, my dad promised.
Which is a faith that she had lost.
Yeah.
But then she recovered it when she had the epiphany in the bedroom about the messages and everything.
Yeah, she knew that connection was remade, and that's what I'm talking about. Every single big plot point is him and Murph.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that she didn't forgive him in that moment, but she forgave him in the moment that she found out that he was the ghost.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
the
yeah,
moment.
yeah. So
And
that moment that she got the stuff and figured out he's the ghost, so that her entire life, she had already sort of had a closure with him.
Yes.
And seeing him face to face was just a formality.
And she had transferred, and John Brand had become that father figure until
Yeah.
the moment he confessed to her
Yeah, for sure.
that her life's work, that she was helping him on his life's work, was basically like I said, placebo.
Yeah, for sure.
And you see that moment in the car when she's with what's his name, Getty,
Yeah,
and
right,
she's
the
like, well, I'm going to
doctor
figure this out anyway. And then it's kind of like that's the point at which she's like, she's doing this entirely for her own, but then she realizes that her father really is their helper, and that's when that love is kind of realized,
sure.
and she finally has that perspective, realizing about what her father has done to kind of save her. She didn't appreciate the time. She didn't even appreciate it, after John Brand died, but now she appreciates it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, but she basically says, she gives him permission to leave, so that he can go find Amelia, who we see in that wonderful final scene has set up a successful habitation on Edmund's world.
And she doesn't have a helmet on, so it means
It's breathable, it's survivable.
Quite survivable.
I mean, it's not exactly a garden paradise, but
it's true.
It-
It's not man's planet. or
exactly. So
Yeah, I felt the relationship between Murph and Coop was very strong, but the one at the end with Brand is like, oh, okay. Like, there's not much to it, but you can tell it's the ending thing, and they want you to feel more for it. But it's like, Nolan's not very great with romantic stuff.
he's not, but I mean, they give hints of it. In terms of, I mean, the complication, of course, is the fact that until she gets to Edmund's world and finds out that Edmunds is dead because of a rock slide. The rock slide, I think, collapsed the habitat or something. There is that conflict. But you get that scene when Cooper's going through the Tesseract, and he's the one that's reaching out to her when they're first going through the wormhole.
Oh, it's true. I never picked up on that. Yeah.
It's kind of he's and because this is really the first time he's fallen in love since his wife has died, which happened before the movie. Whereas Amelia, she is having in some ways it's kind of like it's easier for her to love Edmunds because he's emotionally distant. He's physically distant, and that's kind of where her personality was. She goes through a humanization process in it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's one that I mean, to me, it's
90%.
It's a testament to the quality of the writing that it's genuine, but it's also it does feel a little marginalized because it's ultimately Cooper's story and Murph's story and not Amelia's story.
That's true.
Yeah, they could have thrown in a couple more things to help that out.
Yeah, but I mean, gosh, this movie's almost 3 hours long.
That's true. So maybe there was, and they took it out.
Yeah.
So Dad's last comment for the end of this, she lost all the information when she threw the paper. And she's like, Eureka! Yeah.
Well, maybe she recorded it.
Or maybe she was just throwing a sheet of paper. These are all the bad answers. I can toss those.
Yeah, maybe.
And that's Interstellar.
Yep.
Indeed. Good stuff. Every once in a while, two films will share a bond to transcend time, space, and even genre. These similarities go down to their DNA. So let's dissect and deconstruct, compare and contrast. It's time to go crisscross.
Crisscross.
I feel like we need some sort of music in there.
Dun, dun, dun. Well, yeah, I've got some music in there. But, okay. So I think the most obvious comparison, which we all agree on, because we did text back and forth about this earlier. So both these films have the love of a father and a child traversing large distances of space and time.
Indeed.
I mean, for me, and this is something I've referenced in previous podcasts we've done, which is that as a father, I connect on those elements. But these films, both they're so central to the story. It's not just, as in sometimes case you're seeing it as an element of the story. It is the heart of the story.
Yeah,
for sure.
And it really is the kind of thing where you think about how those bonds really play out in all sorts of ways. And one of the things I love about both these movies, although I think this is more true for Interstellar, is you get to the complexity of it. The fact that sometimes parents are in a situation where they have to make choices that the children may not appreciate, the children may resent, and you might even be wrong, but you're making what is, in your judgment, the best choice possible for your child.
Yeah, I very much see that in Interstellar. There's that giant trade-off that he has to make of, do I go out and save my kids or do I stay here for them? and you can tell it rips him up the way they do it. It's at least a 50-50 thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to ask whether or not his belief that he'll come back in like 5 years, to the degree to which that's a rationalization. It's his way of saying of saying that it's a small sacrifice for a greater payoff, and he never really acknowledges until he's in it what he really has committed to doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we do. We rationalize and lie to ourselves in order to justify the choice that we have to make as a way of dealing with the pain of it.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So. Absolutely. And I think one of the big parts of Interstellar is the cutoff of communication, that he can never talk to her ever again once he goes into the wormhole, that they find out. And that's very similar to...
big contrast between the other one where, I mean, there is this separation of death where he can't talk to him, but then the entire second act of that movie is just them talking back and forth.
So John, for 30 years, he hasn't been able to talk to his dad, and then suddenly he can, and suddenly Coop can talk to his daughter somehow through this tesseract inside of the singularity, and they have a similar sort of energy of this great relief and joy that they can have this thing. They might not be able to see them right now, but they can communicate somehow. That sort of thing.
And with both of them, you have the sense of how, even as adults, the children are still benefiting from their father's guidance.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a point at which fathers do have to say, you're on your own. You get that when Cooper goes and sees Murph surrounded by all the people and being lionized by effectively all of humanity for having helped save them.
For sure.
And the fact that he has to accept the fact that, okay, they're not naming the habitats after him. Okay, they're it's like it's really fascinating, that scene where all these people are surrounding Murph's bed in that final scene, and they're looking at him. He's like an intruder.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the line from, and I'm gonna get hate for this, but Last Jedi, where people just hate that movie, where Yoda is like, that's the burden of all masters. We are what they grow beyond, and
this also gets to something else that I want to emphasize, which is that science fiction, I think, has this unfair reputation for being about gadgets and wizardry and whiz bang lasers and stuff.
Yeah.
And what both these films share is something that I think is really key, which is that great science fiction is based upon the same things that all great fiction is.
Yeah.
Relationships, people, that's at the core of it. But what makes both these films as good as they're, and I think, and I'll be honest, I mean, I think Interstellar does so much better than Frequency, but both of them do it, is the fact that they're both science fiction in the sense that without that science fiction element, neither story works.
Yeah.
But it's not the central to it. It's really about the relationships, and it's about how these transcendences, that you have in terms of time and space. Going back to kind of the theme of one of the lines from our own podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
About how how relationships endure, even beyond those things. It really is, in that sense, a way of talking about relationships that is even more powerful than when you have a more standard fiction of, we're on different sides of the planet, or we're he's a millionaire and she's a maid or something like that.
Okay, I'm going to get religious real quick here.
Go on.
Okay, especially with LDS thing, we believe in eternal families. And that I love this movie because of that, because it's just this love between father and daughter that just transcends time and space. And even though he goes, like accentuated even more by what Joseph said of he would have gone a couple hundred more years going into the black hole. Like, even though he went that far from her, like, he could still visit her, and it's still there. Like, it's, I love that dynamic to it.
That eternal bond.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'm gonna get to the approaches of the different. It's basically this very similar premises, but how they approach them differently. So first of all, I'm gonna point out structure. So for frequency, they're talking for the whole movie. Like they have this connection the whole movie, and there's minimal setup in Act 1. Most of it is in Act 2. Interstellar is pretty opposite to that. There's very little context, like Joseph said, for the full second act of the movie. There's basically no contact between him and her. But the Act 1 is like all him and Murph. You've got to have that to set up this, because you're not going to miss her if you don't know her, and if you haven't set up that relationship in Act 1. That's if you would have just jumped into Act 2 like somebody walked in the movie theater right as they go to space, they would get very little out of this movie.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah,
I think you can get a reflection of that today when you have so many films that are represented by the clips that are out there.
yeah,
And Interstellar has its share of clips, and the clips that I think work are like the ones where they're on Miller's World, where you like the rolling tidal waves and everything. But then you have the ones, because I mean that's how I first really encountered Interstellar. I did not see it prior to seeing this, and I know that's not a great statement about my viewing priorities, but it is true that I have gotten this through like TikTok clips and YouTube clips and whatnot, and the scenes just don't land as well when you're just seeing Jessica Chastain, berating Matthew McConaughey on a screen, or her, in the house. You need that, that initial connection.
yeah, the Act 1 setup. Yeah.
And it's a testament to both actors that you buy into, even though Jessica Chastain and Matthew McConaughey do not have a single scene together. It's
that's right.
It's McConaughey and Foy, it's McConaughey and Burstein, and yet it's a testament to not just the actor but also the writing, that you buy the fact that these two people have an emotional connection, even though the two actors never even physically.
The closest thing to them being physically together is just the intercutting in the third act between the two of them.
When he's literally on another plane.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think it's really interesting, though, that they get the same emotional effect by doing basically the opposite thing of frequency. There's there's enough, it's minimal setup, like very minimalist setup of the relationship with him and the dad. And it's is it kind of hinted at that he has kind of a distant relationship with the son, or the mom is
for sure, where he gets angry at him after he falls over on the bike.
Yeah, so at least emotionally distant.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the whole second act is like you get that distance in the first act.
Yeah.
And then the whole second act is them talking, and
I think of it less as distance and more as a lack of appreciation. It's the kind of thing I think
that would definitely be it.
It's the kind of thing you find, I think, in parenting, which is that, I mean, parenting is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But when it's your day-to-day existence, you take it for granted.
Right.
For sure.
And even when it's fascinating to think about how you get a bit of sense of that with the opening sequence when he survives the gasoline explosion, and he goes home. He's like affectionate to his son, but there's but because that's his life, it's kind of like he kind of reflects upon it and then he's done. And it's not until you get to that second act that he really comes to appreciate the uniqueness of it.
Yeah.
And really to begin to treasure that relationship.
Yeah, same dynamic though of like it's like you don't appreciate it in the first part, and then very much appreciation in the second act. And then for Interstellar, it's lots of connection, building this relationship between them, and then completely separate in the second act until he meets old Murph again in the third act. And they both work great. Like ignoring the timey-wimey stuff. Yeah. Emotionally, I think they work great. Okay, so we might not have much to say about this one, but One is completely earthbound. One is interstellar.
Yes, that is a contrast.
So,
Except for the very first shot of Frequency showing the sun, which causes...
one is stellar.
That's right, it's not interstellar.
It gets to the notion of separation, which is that, in Frequency, the separation is by time, the gulf of decades. Whereas in Interstellar, it's the gulf of space.
I might even say that in Interstellar, it might very well be big. The time gap might be even bigger, because what is space but a place where it takes time to cross?
Yeah.
So the fact that they're far apart doesn't necessarily mean as much as it's going to take bare
there's-
minimum 2 years to get back to her.
Yeah.
Sort of
and
thing.
there's the aging thing of she ages 30 years and then another however many years, 70 or...
For sure. We didn't even see her after the first 2 years, and 2 years is a long time.
Yeah, so that was my last one. Frequency separated by time, Interstellar separated by space and time.
I have a couple of tiny ones.
Okay, so now I'm going to give Joseph his little soapbox if he wants to talk about any more sciencey stuff.
Oh, yeah, well, fun. But anyway, a couple of other small crisscross thingies is... One is people that are not trained, not used to situations or jobs, doing them anyway. So Frank is a firefighter, so he doesn't know how to detective, but he does it anyway. Basically everybody in Interstellar, like with the metaphor with baseball, every single one of them isn't really trained as an astronaut should be trained. They're very prone to emotion. They're working with gear that's 50 years old and all those sorts of things. It's making do with what you have to try and do good, sort of thing. That sort of theme throughout there. And another fun little semi-gimmicky one is in Frequency, whenever there is a perpetuation of time change, whenever his memories are coming back of this new reality, there's the two things that are falling, and when they hit the ground, they're in sync. But them falling is him coming to the gravity of the situation as the gravity pulls these objects down, and that influence of something that is much greater than yourself, some sort of almost natural phenomenon, this huge force coming upon you, this gravity is
and they use gravity to display it.
Indeed.
That's cool.
And Interstellar is about gravity, of course, and all those sorts of interesting things. But that's mostly the other things for the crisscross.
One final one I want to bring up and builds upon something that you were describing, Joseph, which was that in this, I mentioned when we were talking about Frequency, it's very much of a working class centric movie.
Yes, for sure.
We're seeing, these are, police officers, firefighters, nurses who are very much working class. In Interstellar, it's it's middle class in a way. We're talking about scientists, we're talking about engineers, and how they're tackling a problem. And it's so what you're getting is a sense of how working class people, practical people, shall we say, are dealing with this extraordinary situation in which they find themselves, versus these people with professionals at a time when professionalism is being disparaged. And that's one thing I thought that was really interesting. Was there was a class element where, and you get this in the parent-teacher conference meeting,
That's right.
which is the idea that these people that in our society today are oftentimes disparaged, which are the farmers. Now they are.
Yeah, it's inverted.
It's inverted. Yeah. Now it's. Oh well, we don't need engineers anymore. We don't need scientists anymore.
Yeah, that is so inverted.
Yeah,
for sure.
And it's in a sense about how this this group which has been which has been I don't want to quite say rejected, but it's been diminished.
Yeah.
Has to rise up and respond to this challenge that they're facing, and I thought that class one was very interesting because you really are dealing with. I mean, the closest thing you have to a working class representative, interesting enough, in Interstellar is Tom.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
who has really embraced that identity to the point where when Getty and Murph are trying to save his family, he's like, I don't need your medicine. We're gonna stick it out here. And she and Murph, we didn't really get into this about how she at one point in the climax she's burning his fields.
Yeah.
So it's to distract so that they can save his wife and son.
And it's really interesting because Tom, in his video, said that he was doing incredibly well in school. He was second in his class, but still became a farmer.
Well, he was second in his class because in farming.
Yeah.
It's like now everyone's going to
that.
become a farmer.
There is that. Yeah,
and Murph gets spared that, but I mean, it was there's that classist element in terms of Cooper was a farmer. The implication is he was good at farming, but you could tell it's not what he wanted to do.
Yeah,
he felt
sure.
that he was being underutilized.
for sure.
So
yeah, that's definitely true. But yeah.
Cool. So, okay, now we'll have our reviews,
Yay.
star reviews of both movies. So, Frequency, Mark, what would you give it?
I'm really on the fence about this one, but I'm going to go with 3 stars.
Okay.
It's one of those ones where the more I stare at, the more I see the flaws, and I'm really tempted to make it a 2-star movie, but I'm going to go with 3 because the things that really bug me about it are not central to the things about it that I love, which is the father-son relationship, the mystery dynamic, how they solve it. Those elements I like. I feel like at the end of the day, the things that really bother me about the movie, while they do drag it down a bit in my appreciation. I mean, before I rewatched it, I might have said 4 stars, but I feel like that I can enjoy the film in spite of those things, and they don't detract from it too much. So I'm going to say.
Okay, Joseph.
For Frequency.
Yes.
Let's see. So, I really enjoyed the film, but that doesn't necessarily make it a great film. So if I was going to just personally rate my enjoyment, I might even do 5 stars. But I would probably... I still like it enough to give it the 4 instead of the 3.5. So I'll give it 4.
Cool.
Aaron?
Okay. Yeah, I'll give it 3.5. So we've got the 3 to 4 range. Yeah, I really like it. I feel like it's consistent time-wise, besides that hand thing, which I think they just did because they're like, we got to do that.
It takes mental energy to figure out the consistency rather than
yeah. Well, I
it,
didn't even go there. So, but
yeah, for sure.
anyway,
And
It flows if you don't think about it.
and
too
it's
much.
and it's not a film that you expect is going to require so much mental energy. I mean, you go to a Nolan film, and this is something that we've been covering Nolan films. And I think we both have enormous appreciation for him.
Yeah, sure.
yeah,
Is that you go in there, you're expecting a bit of a challenge,
Yeah.
and but it's also one where it's going to be rewarded.
yeah.
And this Frequency, your thing is going to be a father-son thing. And again, if you don't put any thought into it, it's fine. And you start to think about it, and pretty soon you're doing half the work, and you're not getting paid for it.
Yeah, it's interesting the balance there. If you don't put too much thought into it, it's great. If you put a little bit of thought into it, if you put a whole bunch of thought into it, you're now invested, so it's great.
Well, I and that's where I'm kind of like I refused. I'm like, no, I do.
For sure.
I don't love this film that much. And that's why I said when we first proposed this, I was thinking, yeah, Frequency. I haven't seen it in about 20 years, but I have good memories of it.
Yeah.
The thing I enjoyed with it was really just the back and forth and that communication, and that just like Interstellar, that relationship holds it together. And then
it really is, and this goes to the theme. I mean, it really is the heart of the movie, and that's why ultimately I feel like I lean towards 3 stars because while I don't enjoy it as much, that's not incidental. It is the central thing.
Yeah.
The science fiction element is just the
just how you get there.
pretext. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the detective stuff I really dug. It was just
sure.
Once we got into time travel cops, I'm like, yep, I like this. So that's okay. So then our star ratings for Interstellar. Let's start with Joseph.
So, I really want to give it 5 stars, but if I could get 4.9, I would probably give it that. So, I really like most everything about it. and it does better than the mass majority of science films at getting the science right. Some of the science that they had their physicists do, they pushed that aside so that it looked slightly better. But it does a heck of a lot better than every other science movie I can think of off the top of my head.
Cool. Okay, so
I'm still kind of 4 or 5 because I feel like I need to go back and rewatch it. But at the end of the day, the more I think about it, the more I think it really is a 5-star movie.
Yeah, for sure. We nitpick on things that make it not the perfect and always right thing, but it's like 10 times the movie as anything else that tries.
Oh, gosh. Yes. and it is one of those movies that I feel is smart enough to where I can enjoy it for what it is, not feel like this is just some guy whose degree was in creative writing and not in chemistry or something like that.
Okay, so my rating is, you're going to be surprised about this one, 5 stars.
Oh,
I was sitting down for that one.
Yes. So, yeah, I don't... this is kind of a pivotal movie for me. It's for more reasons than one. It's got like a spiritual element for me, of like that eternal family element, and for Father's Day, that's a great thing. And just that relationship between the father and the daughter is just that's the strongest thing that I think Nolan sometimes forgets. Is like Tenet would be a good example of this. He doesn't have the strong personal scale to it, but this one does it perfectly. And I think a lot of people think this movie reaches a little further than it can grasp. I completely disagree. Like it does the science stuff and the Nolan-y playing with time and all the Nolan things, but also has that strong core of that relationship that holds the whole thing together. And
it's so nicely done, the way that you have the facets of relationships in other ways. You have John and Amelia Brand, you have Tom and his family, and you even have Donald and Cooper. Yeah. Where you have the sort of a surrogate father.
For sure.
And how you get different aspects of it. And you really can't fault any of the choices. You don't have to agree with them, but they're all understandable. I mean, I can get why Tom doesn't want to send off his family. I get why John is willing to, in effect, is creating an excuse so that his daughter will be, will survive humanity, the rest of humanity. But it really kind of, all that ultimately, given where it is, are just contrasts with that central relationship between Cooper and Murphy.
Yeah,
sure.
That's exactly how supporting characters should be. That's exactly what they are. They're supporting characters, and they support the main structure of it.
And each one of those is so rich enough that you feel like the characters are well developed. Yeah. I mean, Casey Affleck, does he even have 5 minutes of screen time in this movie?
And very, very few, but he
but it's
does that role really well.
But it really, and of course, the fact that you have an actor of his caliber playing in such a small, lends something to it. But it really gives you, it doesn't feel like it's a 2-dimensional character or a 2-dimensional relationship. It feels like it is something that is supporting, but is developed enough to where you can have that.
Yeah,
for sure. 23 years in the minute?
Yeah.
Of his life.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't have quite the transition between Timothée Chalamet and Casey Affleck. It's not like they aged them through or do CGI. It's just you start with like, boom, oh, there's Casey Affleck. So
yeah, that's right.
Cool. Well, that was a pretty great episode.
It was.
A monster episode. Or I think this is our first 4-hour one. Hopefully it's not that long when it gets to you guys. But
and you got 3 super nerds together.
Yeah.
So our next episode will be Strangers on a Train and Throw Mama from a Train.
Oh, wow.
And our guest will be Tommy Staley, who is the wife of Phil Staley, who we had on our Western episode.
Oh, nice.
So.
The namesake of the podcast is this next episode. Strangers on a Train. CRISS.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Strangers on a Train, the opening.
Maybe
that's where crisscross
for our
comes
next
from.
episode, we'll be going back to our roots and
Yes.
looking at our, the what has inspired it all.
Yes,
That's right.
exactly.
That's great.
He can take care of that in post, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you for listening to the Crisscross Cinema Podcast.
But you wouldn't clap yet, because making something disappear isn't enough. You have to bring it back.